There's planner boards over there. Here.
Good evening, everybody. Just want to make sure that everybody's got their mics on and up here. Seems a little loud. Can I have a motion to open the Finance Committee meeting?
Motion to open the meeting.
Peter? Second. Chief? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining. Okay. I need a motion, a second motion now to open the public hearing, the joint public hearing with the Finance, Municipal Operations, and Municipal Regulations Committee.
So made. Second.
Second, first and second. And I'll need all the committees to vote on this too. So all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And abstaining. All right. We are in session. Peter? Okay, great. And municipal regulations? Can we get a hand? Thank you. Mr. Cohen? Pleasure to see you as well. I'd like to start out just to take a moment to let everybody know that Steve Mitchell, who's one of our comrades on the committee, his mom passed away this week, so that's why he's not with us tonight, and I just wanted everybody to remember her and him and the family in their thoughts and prayers. So, okay. First article, Article 3, rescind Ambulance Department Enterprise Fund. So we're going to start in the deep end. Can I invite the budget team to the table, please?
Where did I see that side?
Hey, look, it's a new mic.
We do have extra copies of the agenda here if anybody needs one.
It says Mr. Microphone. Grazie.
Hey, Maureen. Okay, Mr. Town Manager.
As you know, we are proposing to combine the old ambulance budget and the fire budget into a fire and rescue budget. Primary purpose behind this is that the ambulance budget has traditionally been set up as an enterprise fund, and enterprise funds by state law should break even or make a modest profit. As near as we can tell, going back for years, we have not broken even, let alone make a modest profit. At the same time, we've not, in the budgeting process, fully reported the cost of doing the ambulance service. And when you fully report the cost is even greater. So the first step would be to rescind the ambulance enterprise fund and any assets or liabilities to that fund, and Bill Rowe tells me there are none, would automatically escheat to the general fund. It would become a general fund program operated essentially the same way that trash does.
Okay. And it's Mass General Law that gives us the latitude to rescind the enterprise account just through town meeting.
That is correct. This was vetted with our town council, who vetted it with DOR. We also vetted it with DOR through Bill Rowe and came back with the same answer, which is a pretty good deal because you don't always do that. And they said this is how you do it. And then the actual motion itself and the article itself was written by Brian Riley.
Okay. And our very own vice chair actually went to the trouble of pulling down the law and sending us all 40 pages of it in a PDF, which was kind of nice. And,
Better you than me.
well, I had to reply back to her and say, I'm a little afraid to say that I've already read this. So I was doing some research on looking at the potential trash.
The other thing I'd like to address, so there's a rumor circulating, I don't normally deal with rumors, but this one's relevant, that this is the first step towards privatizing the ambulance. That is simply not the case. There are no plans, either by the administration or the Board of Selectmen, to privatize the ambulance. In my opinion, that would result in a decrease in the level of service. I do not believe the private sector could provide the same level of service our fire department does for the same amount of money. So there is no plan there. This is simply because we are not operating in accordance with state law. If DOR decided to come out and do an audit, we would be cited for failure to break even or make a modest profit.
Okay. And I'd like to open it up to questions from all committees, and we'll start with Mr. Bob Cohen. So the question was, how many more enterprise accounts are not showing a profit at this point?
Right now, projected for the current fiscal year, or actually projected for next fiscal year, only Cedar Hill. And, of course, the ambulance fund.
And Cedar Hill, because of how you understand that one?
I met with the town manager. I asked him the same question, and I understand we have new people up there, and they have to have a chance to prove themselves. I understand there's a nice young man up there, and they said you got 2 years to improve this place, which I think is fair with a new person. I don't want to throw anyone out of work, give him a chance. Maybe he can make this work too. So I agree with him on that.
Yeah, looks like they got a good plan.
Yeah.
But there is an accounting calculation that caused the enterprise account to run a negative $120,000 or look for a subsidized from the general fund this year, because they started back in 2008, I think, in coming up with average cost to figure out what the operating costs were. Mr. Delinsky.
If, I believe the current policy is the Board of Selectmen doesn't chase Stoughton residents for unpaid ambulance bills. That's, if the Selectmen had rescinded that policy and we had chased all the unpaid bills,
You would still lose money.
we'd still lose
You
money?
would still lose money.
Okay.
According to the chief, we are collecting 93% of the collectibles. The collectibles are defined like, and these aren't the real numbers, but say, for example, you have a fair number of Medicare and Medicaid patients, and say the actual cost is $600, we bill $600, Medicare and Medicaid say, sorry, we're paying $380. And as a Medicare provider, we are prohibited by federal law for chasing the difference. So we are actually collecting, while total collections total just over 50%, I believe in the vicinity of 52% of what's billed. In terms of what's collectible, it's over 90%. And even at that rate, we're still losing money.
The other challenge, too, for the fire department is that the insurance companies are paying the patients, and then the fire department has to chase the patients for the money. And it's a problem with the state law that they're trying to change, but it causes an awful lot of trouble for them. So I have Mr. Suarez first, and then Jim, and then
I guess
Ed again.
the second part of Bruce's
Bob.
question, that is the current policy, but the Board of Selectmen has that policy under review. The chief has asked that that policy be changed and that we be allowed to take a little more assertive stance with some residents whom we know have the ability to pay. So that policy is under review.
Mr. Suarez.
Joe Soares, Precinct 2. I believe life is very precious. What I would like to know is from Vice Chair Walsh why she opposes this.
Selectman Welch? Madam Selectman?
Cynthia Walsh, 1096 Park Street, also from Precinct 2. I don't really believe the DOR is going to come crashing down on our heads. I think in the past, water and sewer have been way behind. And I don't recall any audits coming in saying, do this or else. I'm really afraid. I mean, I'm 66 years old, and I don't know how many times I've taken the ambulance because I have a number of health issues. And I am petrified that this will eventually mean less service than we have now. I remember the girl in Brockton who was shot and alive, but died in the 20 minutes it took for the private ambulance to get there. I remember when our ambulances were both out, and I called for my dad. And they said, you know, we'll have to call an ambulance service for you. They were kind enough to do that. Sometimes we don't have enough ambulance service for the requests. I've had that experience personally. And that's what I'm afraid of. I know people say, oh, that's not going to happen, but budgets will be chipped away, and other towns are doing it. Sure, I mean, it's cheaper in most cases to let someone else to do it, but that's because the people they hire aren't as qualified as the people we have. We have paramedics. We don't have EMTs. I could take an EMT course in the summer. I don't think you'd want me trying to save your life. I mean, we have young and people that are super qualified. Rescue is part of their career choice, and I don't want to see any of that go away.
Thank you, Mrs. Walsh. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Jim?
Another big thing, I met with the fire chief over this too. When they bill out over $2.1 million for ambulance, and they get back $1.2 million. And I could see the insurance pays only so much for it. And I thought the fire department would have made some consideration that no one pays full billing. They must have contracts of how much they pay a mile, which he said. So there's $1 million gone right there just on his billing to what the insurance companies pay. So there's another solution. And as far as the Stoughton Fire Department, I don't think anyone would be crazy enough to ever bring a motion to town meeting floor cutting anything of service from our fire department. It's one of the greatest ones around. Remember when Easton lost their certification, where did they come for help? They came to Stoughton. And that's one thing I don't think the people of this town would ever stand for. And I hope people get the message.
Thank you. Jim? Jim Guerin.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
Mr. Fallon.
Moderator. Does the charge for an ambulance run include the fire truck that goes out with it?
If the former chief wants to answer it, I'll let him. He did it for enough years.
It depends on the call. If there's rescue involved, they can tag on the rescue to it, but if it's just a house call and they have to take an extra guy off the engine to put on the ambulance, then they charge for that.
But the fire truck goes out with every ambulance
That's
run.
correct. That's correct.
But
Yes,
we,
that's their protocol.
That's the protocol.
So there are 5 firefighters that respond to every ambulance call.
and occasionally a police cruiser shows up there also. Is that
Occasionally, that's why they carry the defibrillators in the squad cars.
Sometimes they're there before us.
so those charges are not included with the
No, they're
ambulance
not.
run? Thank you.
Out of the
Mr. Fallon? Is it Mr. Fallon? Yeah. Just introduce yourself and street address.
James Fallon, Precinct 1, 891 Pleasant Street. I was just a customer of the fire department a couple of Thursdays ago, 3 exactly, and they saved me. I had a problem and was into the hospital. Just wanted to state that, just so that I know, if anybody can answer this, we have 3 ambulances, but we only use like 1.5. Because only when we have enough people do we use 2 of them. And the other one's for extra use, correct?
Yes.
And
I'd say that's a true statement.
what would happen with taking this money away? Would we have any use for the people that work, the one that we always use.
So there's no money being taken away. They're just taking the salaries and expenses from the ambulance account and now combining it into the fire department. So if you looked at those two separately, added them together, that's this year's budget, with an increase for some salaries
But I
and
would
things of that
rather
nature.
keep it separate just in case, because there is money already being taken out of that fund.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. One sec. Yep. Go ahead, Peter. Sorry.
Peter Murphy, Precinct 2, Municipal Operations. This article, I have a lot of concern about, because this is just being brought before us. It's only about one paragraph long. There's not a lot of explanation. We're going to discuss this for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and you want us to change drastically how we're approaching this. You mentioned that you want the salaries now to be put into the fire department budget. One of the questions I have is, does the fire department budget that's being presented to us this year, does that represent those salaries being brought in there?
Yes.
You have a combined fire and rescue budget. And what has happened years past, basically, is that the fire department budget has been used to supplement the ambulance budget. The ambulance budget has always been underreported in terms of what it takes to operate the service.
So what you're saying is,
And with combining the funds, there's no change in staffing, minimal change in budget. The only change is how we account for the revenue.
so when you, okay, you rescind the budget,
No, we're
I'm
rescinding
sorry,
the
I'm sorry,
enterprise
you
fund.
rescind the enterprise fund.
Correct.
So the money that would have been going into that fund now goes into the general fund. Am I correct in saying that?
That
I
is
mean,
correct.
the revenues.
Okay, it goes into the revenue.
Isn't that a, what's the account called?
It's called an offset receipts
Offset
account.
receipt account.
Essentially, what is being proposed is the exact same way the town does trash and has been doing trash for years.
I think this still has to be debated a lot more, but not in this forum here, because I think it would take a lot more information to be brought before us. Thank you.
Okay. I have to just add one comment, though. We've moved the dispatchers out of that budget, and now for the first time, we can actually see what the fire department numbers look like on one sheet of paper. And it was actually kind of refreshing to see that for the first time in ever. So, John?
Yeah, I agree 100% with the combining the two budgets. I always found it very confusing. There was like a half-time person in the fire budget, and then like a quarter of a person in the ambulance budget. So, I mean, they're both run out of the same department, and it just simplifies the accounting and just
Essentially, what we've done is we've reported 3 to 4 firefighters assigned to the ambulance, and that's all. It takes 18 to 20 to run the service. And that's the actual cost, 18 to 20 firefighters.
So anyways, I'm all for it. It just, you know, it makes sense. It simplifies town government.
Scott?
I was sitting as a selectman, and I asked this question several times, that are we doing this process correctly by supplementing the ambulance budget? And I questioned a couple other ones. And certain people said, well, we've been doing it that way for a long time, and we'll keep doing it till we either get caught or something gets said. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's a good thing things are getting said, because if you don't realize what DOR is doing out there now, you never will. They're cracking down. If you're doing something wrong, they're not going to come to you and fine you. They'll fine you, but they're not going to, you're not going to pony the money right up. They're going to rip it right off the cherry sheet. You're not even going to get that money. So this is clearly bookkeeping. No services are going to be taken away, there's going to be no private ambulances coming in, and none of that has ever been discussed amongst us. This is strictly numbers and figures. It belongs in the fire budget like it was years and years and years ago. But everybody thought enterprises accounts were great because they could bury money there and use it whenever they wanted. But evidently, it wasn't right. And I asked the questions years and years, and now we got gentlemen who are doing it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Bruce?
What Scott just said was what I was going to say. When it gets presented to town meeting, it needs to be presented that there is no degradation of service. There is no change in what's going on. It's just a matter of how it's accounted for. And that's kind of as simple as it is. And anybody that's going to make more of it than that, they'd have to come up with a fact. I don't see where private ambulances are coming in. There is no facts behind that. The facts here, the enterprise fund is going away. It's being brought into the fire department. And that's the fact. There is no change in the service levels. So that's what.
Dispatchers will now be part of police if that's approved.
Yeah, but that's a separate budget. But again, to present it in front of town meeting, the facts are this. It's an accounting change. It's not a service change. And if anybody has any facts other than that wants to talk about private ambulances or anything, bring those facts forward and we'll listen. But until we hear those facts, it's kind of falling on deaf ears.
Okay, so here's our lineup right now. Jamie, then David, then Pat, and Joe again. Jamie.
Just to add another fact to it, for the last couple of fiscal years, the cost of running the ambulance has been underreported between $2 million and $2.5 million round figures. I can give you the exact ones if you want, but that is truth in budgeting by assigning the exact number of employees that it takes to operate the ambulance. So you're looking at more in the area of $3,100,000 to this year, $3,300,000 to run the ambulance.
David.
Yeah, just a point of information. About 6 years ago, former town managers prior to current, we did discuss this same story. And at that time, the Board of Selectmen at the time really didn't want to do it, so it kind of was pushed back. I agree with this wholeheartedly because I used to have to watch both budgets to make sure, according to Bill Rowe, it was done 63, 40, whatever the numbers are now. But
62-48.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I had to watch that because if it was off, Bill would call me and say, what'd you do? And then we'd have to fix it. So I agree with this. I have no problem doing this after having run that department. So.
This is Colburn.
I've chaired the fire department budget for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, and it has always bothered me how inaccurate that ambulance budget was. It just drove me crazy. We could never get a true picture of what it costs to run the department as a whole, because in some ways, I don't mean this in any offense, but it was like a shell game. If the budget was too high, move a little to ambulance, and it comes right off the top of the revenue sheet. Then next year, we'd move it back to fire, and then we'd move it back to ambulance. So it was never accurate to begin with. I just want everyone to understand that. So don't try to fight to keep something in place that was never accurate. You know, I did meet with the budget team, and I met with the fire chief, and you know me, I'll chase down any penny. We verified the head count, the bodies, the positions, the salaries, the expenses. I can personally assure you that all of the money that needs to be in this fire rescue department is there. Like I said, we went down to the bodies. It is all there. You know, I obviously can't, I don't have a crystal ball, no one can see the future, but it is there. So I just don't want anybody worried about something that they think might have happened. It is there. The only thing that looks to be different is in the indirect costs, because we don't have to charge that anymore. So I'm confident that it's all accounted for, and the money in this department is enough to run the services that we have now.
And I'd like to footnote the indirect cost is what generally was putting it over the edge.
That's true of every enterprise.
I know.
Mr. Soares.
Joe Soares, Precinct 2 Municipal Operations Committee. First of all, I want to say, Pat, I think you're a very sharp young lady. I think all of you guys up there do a tremendous job. I have one concern, and maybe it's a concern that I don't like change, and that's fine. But I've heard private ambulances, and I've heard Vice Chairman Walsh get up here and speak about it, etc. And I believe that life is very, very important to all of us. So I need some help. Help me to understand, because I heard that, yes, the town manager wasn't concerned about making it privatized, and I understand that, but maybe he doesn't, but maybe somebody else does. And I don't know what the difference is being privatized or not being privatized. I understand how you people are talking that, hey, look, let's make this fund a little bit simpler, a little bit easier. Just help me to feel better. Thank you.
I would like to recognize the chairman of the Board of Selectmen to respond to that.
John Anzavino, Board of Selectmen, current chairman. Let me just put something to rest. It's not Mr. Hartman just telling you. I can tell you that I've been on this board for 6 years. The Board of Selectmen has never had discussions about privatizing the ambulance in this town. It has not happened. It hasn't happened in any open meeting, and it certainly hasn't happened in any executive session. So whether you believe me or not is up to you, but I'm telling you that this has never been discussed in the 6 years I've been on the board to take this into private, into a private system. All right, that's all. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Selectman O'Regan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob O'Regan, Board of Selectmen. I just want to do a little Soreco here in case it helps people. There is no way that I could see this, or frankly any Board of Selectmen, doing anything to degrade the ambulance service in this community. From my own perspective, the issue of whether or not, which is a non-issue, ambulance would be privatized is completely unrelated to the matter before these committees. What we are trying to do, and it's going to take some time, is to simplify and make clearer how accounting is done in this town and in this budget. This is one major way to do it. Because that's really going to make it easier to have us provide good government for people and better services when we know, and when we don't have people wondering, we have 0.2 here, 0.3 here, and before you know it, the same person counts for 8.2 people in the budget by accident. So that's all this is about. My mother-in-law was with us for a while, and the service that we received from the ambulance crew, words can't describe. The compassion, the professionalism, the quality of care. There is no way that I would see myself on the Board of Selectmen doing anything but making sure that any other family or person in this town who needed the same service that we got received it, whether it is my friend on the Board of Selectmen or anybody else. So if I can ask you all, put this to rest, don't worry about it, that's all I can ask you to do. It's a non-issue. Thank you.
I'd have to add as well that in 8 years on this particular committee, it has never come before this committee in any way, shape, or form. Mr. Kelly.
This is just a proactive effort, because right now, the DOR audit teams from the Division of Local Services have finished Berkshire, the 3 western counties, Worcester, and they're in Middlesex, and they're going to be here in sometime in the next 2 years.
Like killer bees.
And you're not going to have an opportunity to do it the way you want to do it. They're going to do it unilaterally and tell you how you're going to account for the ambulance service. This way you can put it in the budget, the fire rescue budget, and the town meeting can then make decisions on it.
Okay.
It does make it a local decision instead of a position that may be imposed upon us by the state.
All right. Joe?
I'd like to move the question.
Thank you. It's not really a
That's a first.
a procedure for us, but I'll take that recommendation. Roberta, did you have something to say? You were moving to the question. Okay, so let's move on to Article 4, which is upgrade central dispatch at the police station. And the cost associated with that right now is $235,020. I've got to really hand it to you to get it out to the $20 mark here. So.
You can thank Chief Shastany for that. He came in, I thought about rounding it down to 235, but I figured if he went to all the trouble to slap an extra 20 on there, we'd keep it on there. But
Well, the deputy chief is here today, so kudos to the police department for being so exacting. Pat will want to claim it's her influence, but.
The bulk of the cost here, and it is a capital cost, is for the equipment. There is between $10,000 and $15,000 worth of physical work that must be done to the police station to accommodate a central dispatch for both police and fire. But the bulk of it is the equipment to do it. It's equipment that will be used both in police vehicles and in fire vehicles, is my understanding. And with the exception of the $10,000 to $15,000 piece that will be done in the building, everything we have can be moved to a new location should the town decide to build a public safety center. Unfortunately, without the equipment, we cannot do central dispatch.
Okay. Any questions? Ms. Walsh and then Mr. Soares.
It's not really a question. I'm in favor of this. When you call 911, you get the police department, and they ask you what your problem is. And then when you convince them you need an ambulance, they put you over onto fire, and then you tell them what the problem is. Now, when you're having chest pains, having to tell your story twice is a little bit more aggravation than the chest pains. So I think this is going to be, as has been explained to us, the dispatchers will be cross-trained so that they can handle a fire emergency, a police emergency, and a medical emergency until the right responder gets to the scene. So this is what you see on TV. And I think it's going to be more efficient, and you're going to be guaranteed. It's only a couple of seconds, but as a previous speaker mentioned, when you're sick, every second counts.
Mr. Soares?
Joe Soares, Precinct 2. You told me that, I believe you said that the police department needs an upgrade, and I guess their radio system, and my assumption is that the fire department does not. Is that correct?
Well, they're combining the two departments now into one, so the fire department will not be dispatching anymore.
No, but there's $235,000 to make, I would
one
assume.
department.
This is for dispatch equipment. It's not for radio equipment. It has, the calls go out over the radio, but this is for a dispatch station. It's for a third dispatch station.
Okay.
So I guess maybe I'm naive, but it's a dispatch. I'm sure that they call the fire department and they're going to be calling the police department. So this $235,000, does that take care of all of the vehicles? Or am I missing something?
This is for equipment in the central dispatch. It's not for equipment in police cars. There is it includes a computer program that will allow the to give more current and better information to the fire department. Unfortunately, Mark's not here tonight to explain it, but okay, that's part of the cost. All right, I'll let the Assistant
Deputy Chief Devine,
Deputy Chief.
Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Town Manager. What it is, sir, is right now the police department and the fire department operate on two different CAD systems, a computer automated dispatch. What we have to do is we have to bring them together. so that they will flow off the same system. It's also for a third PSAP, which is a third dispatching station, which right now we don't have. We just have 2 in the police department. We had to get 1 approved through Massachusetts 911. They've given us that approval. We just have to pay to have the system installed, if that answers your question.
And the system not state-of-the-art.
Mr. Murphy?
Two questions I have. One is I've heard location mentioned twice. Where would the exact location of this dispatch be?
In the police station.
In the police station. So you're going to keep within the same footprint of that building? You're not expanding at all or anything like that?
There will be an alteration in the building, but there will not be an addition to the building. It will be contained within the current building.
Okay, so, and the other question I have is, whose budget will this be under? The police department, fire department, or a shared budget?
It will be under the police department budget because centralized dispatching will become a police function.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie and then Pat?
The other issue is that once you combine the dispatch, you will not need uniformed personnel to be providing dispatch services. So we are looking at that as freeing up the equivalent of 1.5 uniformed police officers to then be assigned to the street.
Right. Pat?
There's not a shift that goes by, according to the chief, or rarely is there a shift that goes by where there's not a uniformed officer performing the dispatch function at double time.
I just want to clarify that it's under the auspices of the police, but it is in your budget book. It's still a separate department for the actual dispatchers themselves. So it's part of police, but you will see the costs of the dispatchers separate than you'll see it from the police department.
Right, because it's a newly created department.
Right, for the first year, we broke it out separately.
Which actually leads to a follow-up question is, this person who's going to have this job, what type of training do they have? Any type of certification? I mean, it's not something you put the job in the help wanted.
Right now, our police dispatchers are certified for police dispatching. The fire dispatchers are certified for fire and medical. The police dispatchers will have to be trained for fire and medical, and the fire dispatchers will have to be trained for police.
So that training will be part of the police department's budget?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on. Article 17, removal of public works from civil service. And that's on page 7. What? Mr. Kelly?
The purpose of this article is to allow the DPW to recruit new employees without going through the civil service procedure. It has no effect on present employees. There will be no change of their status under civil service.
Okay. Questions? Mr. Soares and Mr. Cohen.
I understand what you said. My question is, why do we want to do this, and does it take away anything from, and I understand it doesn't take away anything from the old employees, but do they get better protection with civil service? And why do we want to do this?
What it does is it means that instead of, and the deputy chief can speak to this, instead of going through 90 to 100 background checks to hire one individual because of the civil service list, we're able to do the hiring locally and not have to sort through those 90 to 100 people. It results in Mr. Batchelder not being able to hire staff quickly, And secondly, it results in unnecessary expense at the police station who have to conduct these background checks.
And how good is our background checks?
They're substantial. They go beyond just a simple query check.
For the police department, for example, when we hired 6 officers 2 years ago, there was at least 40 hours of officer time per candidate, and there was 28 or 30 candidates at the time.
And to answer the second part of the question, the collective bargaining agreement provides as much protection, if not more, to the employees than the civil service protection.
And what, can I get a flavor from you guys up there on what your thoughts are on this?
We haven't
I'm in favor.
met and discussed it or had any vote on it. I don't think this is actually one of ours. Go ahead, Scott. Scott is speaking for Scott right now, just so you know.
I had spoken to the superintendent, and he said that, you know, due to retirements and stuff like that, guys that were at a certain level with a certain grade license, other guys weren't at that level, nor were they going to reach that level. So he said that he was, first time in his life, he was staring at going outside of civil service and outside there to get qualified individuals to put in the seats of his equipment. Because if you don't have a guy who's got a hydraulic license with a certain amount of criteria, you can't put him behind the wheel. But if you get a guy who's been laid off from someplace and he's looking for a job, and that's what they're looking at. He just wants a little flexibility, and the civil service kind of locked him out of that. So it's actually, it's not a bad thing for the town. It really isn't.
Mr. Murphy?
So the way I read what you've just said, and I realize it's your opinion, this is a case of where you can now hire people that have been trained in private industry, have licenses, credentials, and all that, where in civil service, chances are they won't have any of that background, and you have to bring them up to speed, pay for their licenses and everything else.
Takes a long time.
Thank you.
Mr. Cohen, and then Peter, and then Joe.
I think the people stated very clearly, but if you hire, you have to hire the next person on that civil service list, if I'm not mistaken, qualified or not. But then if it doesn't work out, it takes a year and a half, because I went up to see Mr. Batchelor. To get rid of the person, it takes about a year and a half to get rid of him. And I don't think we want that. I think the town should pick who we want. I know the police officers we have, they all live in Stoughton and are well respected in Stoughton. And I still think that we should have the right, as Stoughton residents of people, to pick our own people. I don't think, with unions here today, I don't think any of them would be affected, even the present ones. And I think it's a great idea to do this, and so doesn't the Public Works. He thinks it's a great idea, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Mr. Ventresco, then Joe, and then Jim.
A lot of times in these civil service tests, just because a guy gets a high score doesn't mean he's going to be really qualified to do the field work. Sometimes if the people are in the field, they might flunk the civil service, but the actual job, they're better qualified. That's all I want to say.
Joe?
I'm for this, but I'm curious, how will the town handle the Civil Service Board? I mean, they'll probably object to it.
This is going to be done by petition to the legislature. That's how we have to rescind the previous act. And so the Civil Service Board has nothing to do with it when the legislature passes this as a local option law.
And this is in the works now?
That's the article. We have to go to town meeting
Right.
to have this referred to the legislature.
And you're confident that that will happen?
Town meeting votes in the affirmative. This has been vetted through town council.
I think
It
it's
is
a
the
win-win.
it's the format that the legislative committee that handles these matters has given the towns to do such as we are trying to do.
And I believe of recent, the Civil Service Administration has pushed back a lot of the administrators around to the programs back down to the local level because they don't have the budget money to support it.
Or the personnel.
Or the personnel. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I've heard a lot of, I guess, knocks about civil service here tonight. I find it hard to believe that civil service got so ingrained into public hiring that they don't have some advantages to them. What are we not seeing here?
Virtually every community that was in civil service for public works has gotten out. Stoughton is one of the few communities left. It is now used almost exclusively for police and fire. And after if we're successful at town meeting and we get the bill passed through the legislature, we will still be in civil service for police and fire. There's no move to take them out. It's just that for public works, it's just not a process that works.
The issue is to go through the list to get a qualified individual who will pass all of the tests, the physical test, the drug tests, and if they are, a particular job needs a license, to have that license and have a clean record, because some of our people are going in and out of private property. We are going through between 50 and the last time it was 80 background checks before we find one person qualified. We would much rather hire the most qualified person who applies than have to go through this archaic method of hiring someone.
Okay.
I'm lost here. I just don't understand how civil service got so ingrained in all of this public hiring, and all I can hear about it is how poor it was to use.
Civil service is not the same civil service of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. It has been defunded, number one, in most aspects of it by the legislature. The only ones that have personnel in the state level to issue tests even are the police and fire section of civil service. The contract, when public sector employees were allowed to bargain under collective bargaining, it replaced all of the protections that were formerly under civil service. And as the town manager said, we're one of the few towns that has yet to go to the legislature to ask that the old laws of the 1950s and 60s that the various towns had passed to allow them into civil service. We're one of the last ones who has yet to go to the legislature to ask out of this system, which the legislature isn't even funding anymore to have personnel run it.
Thank you.
Okay. Sir, did you, just your name and street?
My name is Wesley Morgan, Precinct 4, 15 McGrath Way.
What was the last name?
Morgan.
Oh, Mr. Morgan. Okay, thanks. We just for the...
That's all right.
Notes.
I got a quick question. Now, under civil service rules, right, does it not state that if a person cannot fulfill that job within 6 months, they can be let go?
Yes, there's a probationary period.
All right, and there's no way that we can shorten it, like if a person can't fulfill it within the last, say, 3 months, they have to go and someone else has to be hired in the spot with the proper identification for CDL and whatever else? Or does it have to stay 6 months?
Civil service is civil service rule.
Yeah, and this is a question of not hiring them. It's a question of
of finding people qualified.
Finding people qualified
Yeah.
and going down the list.
Yeah, I understand all that. I also understand that it also helps the veterans, correct me if I'm wrong, get up there when they get out of the service to get a job. That's my biggest concern. I don't care if you want to get rid of civil service or not. I mean, if it'll help the town, I'm all for it, 150%. But I also got to look at the veterans who, over the past, we've had certain wars that they've gone through who are coming back home to this country looking for jobs. That's basically what I'm standing for right here.
The DPW lists are formatted so that when you sign up to be put on the list down at the DPW, you then go on the list. There is no exam. The problem is, if people have been on the list for 10, 15 years,
You gotta go through them
they're
first.
not going off the list, as well as the people that you find that are not qualified. So you could have someone that you're looking, to perform a young man's job that has been on the list for 15 or 20 years and is not as robust.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask.
1 second, please. Mrs.
And
Clerk.
able to perform
Sorry.
what we're looking for.
Mr. Morgan, I'm sorry. Did that answer your question, or?
Well, it answered some of it. I just want to thank you because I do think the Public Works does do a great job. And I understand getting rid of civil service. I really do, if it's not helping the town itself out. But you also got to look at the guys who've been there for like 15, 20 years, you know, and worry about their jobs if firing happens too.
They have no protection under civil service now. They have protection under their union contract.
Okay, thank you.
And that doesn't change.
Yeah.
And can we still give veterans
Sorry,
preference?
wait a minute. There's an order here, Mr. Rock.
Okay, it's just a question.
I understand that, but we've got people in line for questions. Ms. Clip.
Karen Clip, Precinct 6, 53 Pat's Court. I'm a firm believer, and I'm a union person. I believe in the civil service process. It does work when it's managed properly. I enjoy going through a stack of applications when I was working, because I was an EEO, and the process does work. If people think civil service is broken, then they don't understand it. And I think it's a good thing, and we should keep it. Thank you.
Joe Suarez, John Rock, and then Carolyn.
Joe Soares, Precinct 2. Is there any way we can put in there to make provisions for veterans?
I will defer to the Budget Committee.
The Board of Selectmen can pass a resolution if they wish, but more importantly, we can propose at the next town meeting to amend the personnel bylaw to include a veteran's preference, if that's the wish of the town.
If you do that, I would be for it.
John Rock.
Same point.
Okay, great.
Hi, Carolyn Campbell, Precinct 5, Municipal Operations. I have a couple questions about this. I am not sure, I'm still having trouble understanding why it's okay for the town to use the civil service for police and fire and not for public works, and why you have the difficulty hiring people in the public works when you don't have the difficulty hiring people under police and fire.
Actually, we do have difficulty with the timeline under police and fire. But police and fire involves an eligibility process to get on the list. Again, public works, you simply sign your name up and you're on the list. There is no eligibility process. There is no testing. There is no attempt to determine if you have proper licenses.
Okay.
And the Civil Service Department, or the Yes. HRD has a budget to do police and fire. They do not have a budget to do any of the other.
Human resources to do. Okay, and my next question to follow up with that is, I believe Mr. Kelly mentioned that a lot of the towns in the Commonwealth have taken the Department of Public Works out of civil service. Out of those departments, out of those towns, how many of them actually have public works employees doing their trash pickup, or how many of them have privatized their trash pickup? So that they're talking about a lot less of numbers of employees in the first place doing more specific types of jobs.
I don't know.
Could you find out and get back to me at some point?
I can put out an email blast through the MMA. If people reply, then I can put together results, but that doesn't mean that everyone will reply.
But there's no way to research the towns that have been out and how many of them are privatized on trash, other than an email blast to the MMA?
That's the only way I know to reach all of those towns, other than to write them. And
There's no like public record saying which towns have privatized?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Career.
Not that I know.
Just a little information. Town of Sharon has never been on the civil service. They hire all their guys straight out of advertisements like that. Their trash has always been private, except way back in the 50s. But Town of Canton has just dropped civil service. I think it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, they dropped their civil service. Just because you're on a list, it doesn't give the town the best person. It's like I tell guys that come and want to work for me. They roll out about 25 licenses, and I go, you know, the guy makes the license. So this is why you have to sit with the guy and interview him, so you get somebody who's in a $100,000 machine, or a $185,000 truck, or a $245,000 trash truck that's going to drive it and not smash it. It's very important. Civil service is archaic, and it was designed back when unions weren't in control of things, and you have basically like a double overlap with a union and a civil service, but one's dead and one's active. So it's another house cleaning thing that's going to give Mr. Batchelor a better shake for what he wants to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Moving on. Article 21, page 9. And this is with regard to purchase orders.
I was going to get up.
This is an amendment to a bylaw for purchase orders.
I'd have to see the details. I'm with you.
We're going to start off right away.
Welcome, Maureen.
Oh, good evening. Sorry, I'm just getting organized here. I'm here to present Article 21, which is changing the threshold of the purchase orders to the limit to comply with the state statutes, the minimum of $10,000. And I want to just give a couple reasons on why I want to do this and why it would be such a good benefit to the town. First of all, when I took over the position last year, I was handed the Purchasing Procedures Manual, adopted by the Selectmen in 2008. The basis for this manual starts with the purchase orders at a limit of $3,000. It's grossly out of date. It's not in compliance with any of the state statutes anymore. And to start having a modern purchasing department, we need to start with the basis, and that's the purchase orders. Right now, the current system is not functioning. It's not functioning as it should be. It's used primarily as a bill payment system. It's very, very expensive to manually operate in the town. For example, we do about 2,000 purchase orders a year. The majority of them are to pay bills. And I just did a quick little math system. Just with the hard copies of supplies, it's about $1,500. That's with postage, copying, envelopes, ink for the toner on what it would cost us. And that's just with the hard cost. Do you want to know how many people it takes to do a purchase order? There's an administrative person that basically enters it. The department head then needs to sign off on the purchase order. The town accountant then has to review the purchase order, see if there's money in the budget, and then he has to approve it. It comes to the procurement officer. I look at it, make sure it complies with the laws, which right now I'm getting the majority of them after the fact because they're using them to pay their bills. I have to approve it. Then we have to make 3 copies of each of these purchase orders. One goes to the vendor, one is filed with the department, and the other is filed in my office. We need a staff person then. They have to fold all these, insert them into the envelopes. We need a custodial person to apply the postage and bring it over to the post office. And then finally, either myself or somebody from accounting gets all the phone calls because the process isn't working the way it was originally intended in 2008. That's 8 members of staff that deal with one purchase order that could be as little as $29. So why, do you want to answer a question?
No, please
Oh,
continue.
okay. Some of the reasons that we have with the purchase orders.
Marina, just if you could get closer to that mic,
Oh,
it'd
I'm
be
sorry.
helpful.
I know. Some of the reasons we have problems with the purchase orders is people use them, you know, for bill payment. They think they're going to get a bill, let me encumber the money. And then last week when I was here for another article, that there was a problem that these show up then at the budget as adjustments. One of the things that I've talked to the town manager about, and we've talked to departments about, and the town manager really wants to look into implementing it this year, is we really want to get a spending plan with the departments. We have capital items that are coming up. We have procurements that need to go out. Let's plan them, encumber them. When we're done with the purchases, liquidate them. It should help clean up the entire financial system right now that we're bogged down with some inefficiencies in the process. And I think it's not a matter of that it affects anybody's rights out there to approve anything. This is only an internal process that lies mostly within my office. And I'd be glad to open my file drawers and show you thousands of pieces of paper that just sit there. And I have to then hold on to them for several years until I can get permission to destroy them from the public records request.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, first of all, is it correct that people at department heads or personnel are ordering things, and then after the fact are creating the purchase order because there's a bill coming in that they got to match up to the purchase order to get it paid? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, what happens, sometimes WB Mason is a prime example. We have a contract with WB Mason. If we adopted to the $10,000, we spend over $10,000 townwide on WB Mason. I would tell every department, you're going to use money on WB Mason, put in your encumbrance in the beginning of the year, purchase order. We have a contract. We've met our 10,000. You need to put in a purchase order. So now what's happening is somebody puts in their order for pencils and pens. Then they say, oh, I should have put in a purchase order. I got the bill. They put in the purchase order to say, oh, I got a purchase order. But that then gets us dinged on our town audits because the auditors pull it and say, you know, your bill's dated July 1st. Your purchase order's dated July 30th. So we're not using it correctly, and it's putting us at risk of not getting good audit reports.
So I understand that raising the spending limit, the minimum threshold, and I think that we're going to be talking about the word threshold here in a minute, eliminates a lot of the purchase orders that would get created, and a lot of that paperwork and a lot of the flow, this workflow out of the system is what you're saying.
Well, what it allows us to do is to really use the purchase order system as it was envisioned in 2008 to be used, as an encumbrance system to be used with the contracts that we do. We now look at the purchases we have across departments and say, you know, DPW used AutoZone, fire department used AutoZone, police department used AutoZone, spent over $10,000, but nobody put in a purchase order, so you got $3,000 here, $2,500 here, $1,500 there, wherever, and it's not matching up. So now we'll go in with a holistic approach and say, $10,000, it's town-wide, not $10,000 per department.
I'll open it up to the committee. Roberta, then John and Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hill. I'm interested in the wording of the article and the word threshold. All right. I understand the $10,000 or, the conjunction or, the thresholds for soliciting quotes or responses or for bidding as mandated by Mass General Laws, Chapter 30, Section 39M. So first of all, what's the threshold for Chapter 30, 39M in dollars?
$10,000.
$10,000 for that. All right. Now, semicolon, so we're on to something different here. But that's for public works, for the 39M for public works, semicolon, right?
Correct.
Then I go to Chapter 30B, Uniform Procurement Act for Goods and Services. What is the threshold for that?
$10,000.
And that's also $10,000, all right. Now I go to, after that semicolon, and Chapter 149, Building Construction Projects. What's the threshold for that?
$10,000.
So they're all $10,000?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, John, then Jim, then John.
Okay,
John.
I think you need more steps. I don't trust your system for the number of approvals. To me, this is in the no-brainer category. We debated it to death last year. Let's modernize town management. I know you guys are trying to do it. Let's give you guys the tools to use the purchase order system the way it was meant to be used, and join the rest of the state in adhering to the state threshold. Let's just simplify and use our efforts in more worthwhile projects. That's it.
And I'll just add that I think that this committee last year at the special town meeting, we all were in agreement that the spending limits had to be raised. It was just a matter of the language in the article that we had trouble with because it wasn't specifically $10,000. And Jim?
Thank you,
And me last.
Mr. Chairman.
Then John, then-
I do agree that this is a proper move for the town. One question I have, though, is if we write a purchase order and encumber the funds for it, and then don't get a bill from the company that we wrote the purchase order to, what happens with those encumbered funds? Do we still going to get this article every year for unpaid bills?
What happens to them now is that they're carried, and those are the budget adjustments you saw and asked questions about. Under the new system that we will use at the end of the fiscal year, this fiscal year, they will be extinguished by a date certain, and if the vendor hasn't submitted a bill, then it will have to come back as an unpaid bill and require 90% vote, as the statute requires.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Jim, what we're really going to do is spend $1 million on an accounting system to fix that.
900,000, but it's okay.
I'm kidding. I don't want to cast any aspersions on that software. I have Mrs. Anzavino and then, I'm sorry, John Malley, Barbara Anzavino, the moderator, and then Mrs. Hill.
All right, so I'm up. So we talked about this last year, obviously, a lot. And I think one of the things that came up was several years ago, there had been a move to increase the limit in our own bylaw, I think to 20,000 back then. And town meeting was dead set against it, even adjusting that limit, because they didn't want to lose that control of the amount that can be spent. And so the issue we had last fall, and the issue I still have, is why can't we just adjust our bylaw to say 10,000? Why do we have to adopt the whole Mass language? Because that, when you say 10,000 or the threshold, if Mass decides to go to 20,000, we have no control. We're automatically at 20,000. There's no control over that anymore for town meeting side.
That's the intent behind the article. We want to be at whatever the state law is. We think it's
But
time to
but
join the
town
rest
meeting
of the
had-
Commonwealth.
Well, I mean, 3 years ago, town meeting had an issue going.
I understand that,
limit.
John, but from the staff
So-
perspective, we think it's time to join the rest of the
Well,
Commonwealth.
I don't have an issue with going to change our bylaw, but I do have an issue with it changing to whatever the Mass law says and forcing us to be on that where the town doesn't want to. I mean, that's what the issue was 3 years ago when they tried to raise it, and it's the issue I still have with it. I don't have a problem going to 10,000 because I think that the 3 or 4 or whatever we're at now is too low, but I don't agree with just blanket. We're now going to go with whatever Mass says. Mass goes to 25, we're at 25. Mass goes to, I don't want that, and I think town meeting had an issue with that 3 years ago, and they probably will again.
Mrs. Anzavino.
I'm pretty much with John that it's the word "ah" that's bothering me, because if the state goes up, then we don't have any control over it, and we don't know when the state's going to go up. So that's all I want to say.
Well, in 2004, the state went down, and went down in the public construction to $1.
There probably was a very good reason.
It was an error that caused huge problems, and it took them several years to fix it. But because of that, then we would have the flexibility. And right now, I require everybody who's going to do a Chapter 149 project, I don't care if it's $5, I want a purchase order, because I have to pull certified payrolls for those. We have to make sure if there's a bonding requirement that we get the bonds for those. It's a cumbersome law. So even though it's $10,000, we'll implement it slowly, because there are certain requirements that do require bonding and everything. So we want to have the internal controls to manage those processes to make sure we follow all the other requirements. But the $10,000 is town-wide for purchases. So now if it's $3,000, which is the current, that if the fire department spends 1,000 and town hall spends 1,000 and 2 other departments spend 500 each, and we don't have a purchase order, we're in violation of our town bylaws. So it's not a great amount of money, it's town-wide, and it eases up that burden.
Well, I have no problem with the 10,000. I'm perfectly fine with it. It's just the fact that the state can do it whenever they want is what bothers me.
They haven't changed it in over 30 years.
Yeah, I still don't trust them.
Okay, and, yeah. Mr. Moderator. I would like to also point out that, does the town manager's signature required on a purchase order?
He's required on a purchase order of over $100,000.
Just over 100,000. So the most senior person in town approving a purchase order today would be the town accountant? And certainly...
The town accountant, he does it as to funds.
Purchasing officials notwithstanding.
It's a dual signing.
Yeah.
The actual approval comes from the chief officer or the designee.
Right.
If they're under 100K is Maureen, or the school department.
Right.
And all the accountant's role is to certify that there are funds available.
Right. So just 2 points is that, number one, it can never exceed what the town appropriated through the town meeting process for a particular budget.
Correct.
I think that's the origins of this, was somebody went out and bought a fire truck once and didn't have any spending limits. Mr. Moderator.
Mrs. Anzavino basically touched on my concern when we address a state statute, and I'm looking down the road, is essentially the same thing that's already happened. State statute was based on the original law when Mr. Farrington proposed this as town manager, well, formerly chairman of the Finance Committee. Now, the state can change these numbers, and you're addressing that. I think the same issue is, how do you know when that is changed and whether we have to upgrade our law or whether our bylaw will become, let's say, null and void, and we don't, in other words, I'm just looking
I have
for
a sneaking
something so that this
suspicion we'll
doesn't
know
be-
when it changes.
well, we're finding this out now. I do sympathize with the process because even some of the bills that I've had to put in, and it's a very complicated process for a lot of paperwork that is not, well, let's put it this way. Somewhere you need to keep the accounting, but how much of you is small stuff? And my only concern was whether there's any way that we have some protection so that both the town knows when this happens and town meeting knows whether it has to adjust.
Okay. I've got 4 more speakers, and I'm going to cut off debate on this. I have Mrs. Hill, I have Bob Cohen, I have Joe Suarez, and John Rock, and he'll be the last one.
Anita Hill, Precinct 2. A couple quick questions, I hope. I heard mention of unpaid bills, and it just piqued my interest. It's kind of related, kind of not related. I work in the private sector, and I do a little bit of accounting. Purchase orders in our world have receivers or receipts against them. Granted, it's a computerized system, and we can enter in a receipt against it. There's a report that we can run that says uninvoiced receipts. Rather than having surprise unpaid bills, is there any way we track the receipts? Do we get receipts against something that's coming in so that we don't have the surprises of unpaid bills after the fact? If I have a list of unpaid bills, I call the vendor ahead of time so there won't be unpaid bills, so that they're paid on time. Sometimes you got to give them a poke. And the next thing was, we have an accounting system, like I said, where it's all computerized. Purchase order, anyone in their departments can put a requisition in the system. There are only 2 people authorized to approve it. Once it's approved, it goes through to an automatic purchase order, and then the purchasing agent, he basically places a call to the vendor and places the order. So it's not 8 people. I know we're real small, and it's not a public building, but just comments from side.
Excellent points, Mrs. Hill.
Yeah. Oh.
Moving along to Mr. Cohen.
Am I correct? Did I hear someone keep repeating that people order without purchase orders? Did I hear wrong, or was that right?
You did not hear wrong.
That is correct.
I can't believe that this town allows people to just get on the phone and order stuff without a purchase order next to it. With all the modern systems that we pay for and have in this system, there's got to be a way, if they're ordering something on a computer, that comes into the purchasing department. I can just see this coming in month by month. Oh, I'm sorry. How much do we pay in late fees, may I ask, for we don't pay our bills on time? Has anyone counted that yet for late fees?
I have in all my contracts that I issue for the town, that I tell them that they should expect payment between 60 and 90 days, and we do not pay late fees.
Let me tell you, ma'am, if I was doing business with the town of Stoughton, I wouldn't be doing business with it. Wait 90 days for your money and then not get a service charge on top of it? I wouldn't do business with you. I think we better think about doing something a little better with our purchase orders, or they're going to bill you more money to cover the 60 to 90 days. We're in the world today where people need their money, not 60 to 90. And I have news for you. You run longer than that. You run sometimes 3 months, 4 months. The credit rating of Stoughton isn't that great with vendors. I just want you to know that. And you will be paying fees because they won't be selling to you long. Word to the wise.
Could I make a point of clarification on
please.
this? The procurement officer in the procurement department does not place orders for any products with the town. Each of the town departments handle their own departmental purchases. The procurement office only deals with, right now, the centralized purchasing of the larger, the postage, the copy machines, telephones, items like that, individual office supplies, various parts for police, fire, DPW, Council on Aging, the library, are all handled by those individuals. We don't have a purchasing department that has taken away that function from the individual department.
Can I ask a question? Who pays the bills? If it takes 60 to 90 days to get paid, someone has to issue a check against something.
How I understand the invoicing and the bills are done, when the product comes in and the department's satisfied that they have everything that they ordered, the department staff enters it into the KVS system. The warrants are done twice a month. The backup paperwork comes up to the town accountant's office, who then verifies that it's correct. It's a double check. I believe there might be, 2 or 3, checks and balances in the process. Then the warrant is prepared and put
Okay.
out for signature.
I've kind of let us go off track here. This has not anything to do with this
Correct.
particular article. I understand that it's a procedural problem, but let's stick to the topic if we can. Mr. Soares?
Joe Soares, Precinct 2. I'm not sure that Ms. Hill got her answer. She had talked about, I forgot what she talked about now. She had talked, I'm sorry, what was it? Say it? Oh, that was just a comment? I thought it was an excellent comment. Okay, but I believe...
You're baiting me.
I believe the town manager wants new software. Okay, and I believe in that new software, it should be something to correct that. Is that true, sir?
Yes.
Okay.
On a massive scale, yes.
And could I just make a comment to Mrs. Hill? In an ideal world, it would work like that here. But we have a very labor-intensive, paper-driven system.
Mrs. Anzavino, you had mentioned something about the word "or." Is it the top sentence, no purchase or contract to purchase supplies or services in excess of 10,000, is that it?
The word that comes after the or,
Right.
the word that, what page I got?
Now, my concern is this.
The threshold, or threshold.
Yeah, or services in excess of 10,000, or the threshold.
Right, and currently the threshold is $10,000.
Okay. I apologize for being naive, but what's the point you're trying to make with this?
I'm trying to make that it's an either or, as opposed to like if our goal is $10,000, but the state says 20, then we have to listen to the 20, even though we at town meeting may have preferred the 10 because they put the word or in it. If they had used 10,000 or the state threshold, whichever is less, I would have been a happy camper.
Now, let me just say this. I think Big Brother sometimes is way out of whack, but that's just my opinion. Why can't the Board of Selectmen change that?
Not in this warrant. It's already been approved and moved to town meeting. It's too late to change the wording in this warrant.
It's the wording they want. They don't want it.
The alternative wording isn't acceptable, frankly. The intent is to tie the town to state law. I've always made that clear. That will continue to be my position.
Which means
He doesn't have any intention of amending the language.
I guess I have to ask, Why is it that you don't want to amend the wording when, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not for this because of the wording, because of what Mrs. Enzovino said. So why wouldn't we want to amend that? What is the big deal about this?
As I've said over and over again, the intent here is to join the rest of the Commonwealth. All we're asking to do is live within the state law, period.
There's a lot, I'm sorry, there's a lot of state laws I don't agree with, and I'm sticking with Mrs. Enzovino. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rock?
Again, how often does the state change the limit?
In the probably 25 years that I've been involved with public purchasing, twice.
Okay,
They
I
have
think
changed
this
it.
is a real red herring. Let's just get on with it, give these guys the tools to modernize. The state's not going to be willy-nilly changing this limit. What do other towns do? Excuse me? Right. I mean, let's join the other towns. It seems like a meaningless debate to me.
Okay. Mr. Rock was to be the last person to speak. Is there something new to add here, Mr. Dolinsky?
I was just wondering if the speakers who didn't like the or threshold, 10,000 or the threshold, what if we just skipped the 10,000, just went with the state law?
That crashed. That crashed.
Oh yeah, I voted for that, I forgot.
You're out of order.
Yeah.
Okay, I am moving on. We've had enough discussion on this. Implement electronic healthcare records, Article 22, page 9. Yes?
Chapter 30, Section 39.
Not on this. I'm moving on, Mr. Moderator.
It's a 10,000 and under. Read it the law. I'm on this.
Yeah. Oh, you want me to mention that?
That's a separate one.
Okay.
Did we go over 21, I guess?
Article 17. Just a moment, if we could. Maureen, I'm sorry. Could you come back up again just for a moment? Article 20 was omitted in the print ads for the public hearings that were out there. And Article 20, and it ties to Article 21. Can you qualify the difference in why you have the two different articles here?
Right, the purchase order is truly just an internal process.
Thank you, by
The capital items is part of the town manager's vision in spending plan and capital plan, that rather than have little $1,000 items, if it tied again in with the state law for the procurements, that it would be a more concise and a better managed process. I just
Okay.
thought you wanted me to come back for 2 nights.
Were there any questions on this, Peter?
Town meeting approved it. It's done. In every budget.
Did Article 20 require an open town meeting, actually, no, a public hearing on that? Did we just miss that?
Well, I believe it's going to happen in the subcommittee, but this, what I just said was it was supposed to have appeared in the public hearing ad for tonight, and it didn't. So that's why we're talking about it now. This is the public hearing.
Right, but for public hearing, don't you have to have that posted? So do you fall into a situation?
Well, it was posted on our agenda, which has been out there for a week and a half.
So it just didn't make the...
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. Are there any other questions? You don't have information? What do you mean you don't have information?
We have nothing written. The packet they got didn't have that in it because they don't have the whole warrant.
Oh, they don't have the whole warrant?
Yeah, I mean,
So the packet they got didn't have Article 20 in it.
Yeah, I think you only extracted certain parts of the warrant, right? You don't have the whole warrant.
That's correct.
Nobody, well, but these, wasn't this assigned at the, uh, not ops? Right, right.
Well, by town meeting approval.
Right.
We've approved
Thank you.
capital outlay purchase.
Okay, so, and the Rules Committee assigns which articles, which standing committees will hear. In this particular case, Article 20 was assigned to the Finance Committee and to the Rules Committee, so. Excuse me, Mr. Riggs, I'm sorry. Mr. Anzavino?
The question that I heard was, Article 20 wasn't in the published ad for public hearings. And if it wasn't in the published ad, then how can this be the public hearing? That was the question I heard. Maybe I misunderstood it, but I looked at the ad and I didn't see Article 20 listed, so.
Mr. Moderator,
just
did
a
you want
word
to
of
speak to that,
caution.
please? Howard? I have the ad. We have it.
I had a different one.
Yeah.
I had a different one, that's all. I had one without.
Can we add it with one of the school ones or Southeastern or something?
can.
See Stephanie up there?
I have it.
No.
I have it.
No.
I have it. I have the ad.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's fine,
I understand that. And I said that at the front end, that it was not in the ad. And I have the ad that it's not in. Okay.
Right. And the question here, and why I wanted to raise this issue, was we are required to have a public hearing, and it was assigned and in the packets for the Municipal Regulations Committee. And the similarities of the wording in grouping these articles to be in the hearing process. So if you want to take it at this time, or and consider that it, as part of the hearing, because it is related to the same issues that were discussed here, and unless somebody wants to challenge later that we didn't have a hearing, I'd rather say the hearing has made mention and actually discussed.
All right, well, why don't we take the safe path? I'll entertain a motion from somebody on this committee, on this board. No, that's not it. Our next, because we can't advertise it by then. But we do have a meeting on the 31st, and we can tack it onto that and put it in that ad.
I move that we re-advertise and hold the public hearing for Article 20 on the 31st of March.
Pat and Joe, okay? And I'm going to need municipal regulations to also vote on this. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining. All right, so we will table this until the 31st. Moving on. Thank you, Maureen. Table Article 20.
You sit alone.
Okay, Article 22, implement electronic healthcare records. Also on page, it's not on page 9, it is on 9. Okay. Welcome.
Hello. Hi. Hello, everybody. Yes, the Public Health Department is looking to hopefully implement electronic healthcare records.
Yep. And can we qualify who the Public Health Department is?
Okay, the Public Health Department is also known as Stoughton Visiting Nurses.
Okay.
You can call it that.
It's getting confusing
Not
because...
it's not our official name. Our official name is the Public Health Association.
And then the
We are
Board of Health
VNA.
is calling themselves the Health Department, so we're just
Okay,
confused.
so we'll just say the VNA.
Yep, thanks.
As you probably know, if you've heard a lot about healthcare reform, it's now becoming a mandate that all healthcare providers will be using electronic health records. So this is something that most agencies have switched to from paper records. We're already electronic in OASIS, our assessment, transmission, to Medicare and our billing. And this is just the piece that would require, like when you go in your doctor's office, usually you'll see now that there's somebody not writing on a paper record. The doctor may be taking notes on a laptop. This is what would be happening. The clinicians out in the field would be carrying laptops, and it's to help efficiency and hopefully cut costs. And it's just time. It's mandated. It's actually, we'll probably be facing penalties down the road if we don't switch over. So.
Okay. Peter, then Bruce, then Jim, and then Mr. Cohen. And then Scott.
And us.
And then Barbara and Pat.
I think the key word here is implementation as far as this article. And you're looking for $200,000, and I say start the process. And first word that catches my eye is purchase laptops. And I see everybody else with iPads. Now that's semantics, I realize that, and it should be electronic devices. But what I also started, as I started to look at this, I start to wonder, okay, how will the equipment be tracked as far as what you buy? You have different nurses for you, what goes in, what comes out. How does the department, keep an eye on that?
Well, there are many companies that have this type of equipment, and of course we're going to want to review the different setups because some are web-based and some are more with the server, and it's maybe a little techie for me to even try to get into it here. But from what I understand, most of the agencies, if you're assigned a laptop, it is your responsibility. They're insured, they're encrypted, they're safeguarded, and I mean, you have only a certain number, and we're a small agency, so we don't have some agencies have maybe 100 clinicians, whereas we basically have about 20. So I think it would be easier for us to keep track of our equipment.
Okay, the next question will be, how will the equipment be maintained? How long do you anticipate this equipment to last? Do you figure it's like a 5-year plan?
Well,
No list.
Go ahead.
Well, hopefully, I think actually the devices are probably one of the more reasonable features of, it's probably not the devices that are going to cost as much as it is getting this up and running and interfacing with our existing software in training of the staff, because there is a learning curve that goes with it, and we'll have to do that. So I can imagine that, like any device or whatever, there would be a certain span, but I don't think that would probably be, I mean, if you think about how inexpensive laptops are now, or Palm Pilots, or whatever the device is, it's probably not going to be the most costly feature of this endeavor.
They just revised it in August.
Going forward, will you include money in your budget required each year to maintain the equipment, the software, the licensing?
I believe we have to.
Has there been anything put in your budget for this year, in this year's budget, to cover licensing, maintenance, or any of those issues?
This ballpark figure I felt would probably cover any of the fees that would be associated for the first year.
What do you anticipate licensing fees and software updates to cost per year?
I have no clue.
Who's the person in the department responsible for security?
We have a HIPAA officer. There's somebody dedicated. Where, of course, as a department head, I think I'm ultimately responsible, but there's always somebody named. We always have to have a security officer, and in our office right now, it's Sharon Chason.
I'm talking more security as far as the data and all that. What's that? Okay, so right.
Kept on the network, it would be the IT.
So it actually, all the maintenance as far as update softwares and all that comes under the IT?
Yes.
They do the whole town as, okay. You're saying that this is mandated by Medicare?
Yes, part of the
Medicare.
Affordable Care Act.
Right, and is there any funding from the government to help? I knew that was coming.
Well, there actually, you had to jump in very early on. There was a program but you had to jump through a lot of hoops, and at the time we weren't really prepared for that. You had to show meaningful use, and there were steps along the way. So I'm not really sure if there is any funding, but.
Okay. Last but not least, comment. I don't think $200,000 is enough to cover what you want to do, and I wish you luck with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bruce?
This is coming for the visiting nurses, and that's the enterprise account, visiting nurses, that has, last year, I thought it was like $1 million surplus.
We would think that would be the funding source, yeah.
Why won't you
Retained
take it out of your own money as opposed to having the town borrow it?
We're not proposing to borrow it. That's the standard language. We are proposing it come from the fund. Town meeting still has to appropriate it from the fund. We can't just take it out.
Right.
So this is going to come out of the surplus, out of the visiting?
Correct.
Fine. Good luck.
Jim Guerin?
Can you break the $200,000 down into hardware and software for me?
Not yet, but when I get, I haven't been able to get people here. I wanted to have me move along in the process. I've talked to a couple of companies. So they're going to have to break it down as to what it's going to cost. I don't have those figures yet.
The inter-system identification for the patients, how is that handled?
Everything, if it's on a device like a laptop out in the field, there is safeguards. Information is encrypted, just like security for the internet. There's high level of safety with the laptops.
And this software will take care of all that encryption?
Yes.
Thank you.
The current system you're using right now is the Heritage system, right?
What's that?
What current system are you using right now?
Well, we have all scripts for entering our data that gets transmitted to Medicare. And so we have electronic billing and we have data submission, but the piece that's missing is actual, like the clinical note piece. So it doesn't all tie in together yet, and that's what they want all healthcare providers to have. So between hospitals and private physicians and home care, it's easier communication, more effective, less chance of errors with medications. So you could actually look up somebody's information. A doctor could get a nurse's progress note right over to them. Right now we're on paper records, and it takes up a lot of room in the office. We have file cabinet upon file cabinet of everybody's health records.
Okay. Mr. Carrera?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might sound redundant since Bruce touched on it, but we want to move forward. You're always talking, we're moving forward, not you, Janice, it's sort of towards the town manager. It's the wording of this again, and I understand, but a more distinct, more definitive wording, I think, would have been better for town meeting, like to available funds within the enterprise budget, which we know is there. I get a little jiggy when I hear from the Treasury, borrow sufficient amount attached to the tax base or whatever. If there's available funds there, just let us all know they're there, ask the town meeting to vote to release them funds or whatever, and just nail the line down. I know what will happen if they say, no, let's not release them because we like to see them. This is a fail-safe to borrow. I like to get away from borrowing.
Technically, when you refer to the treasury, you refer to all funds the town has, including funds held in trust, which would be the enterprise fund.
That's what I thought too. That's what I thought too.
And ultimately, this committee is going to make a recommendation in the form of a motion and what the funding source would be. Barbara?
I'm all set.
Pat?
Same question, all set.
All right, moving on. Article 40, page 23. And this is to amend Chapter 59, Article 11, public consumption of marijuana or tetrahydrocannabinol. How did I do?
I feel like we needed some.
Like I was smoking it, right? So this is Article 40, page 23. Of the actual warrant. I don't know if the municipal operations has their own warrant, but okay. Whenever I refer to page numbers, it's the page in the warrant. Welcome, Deputy Chief. And who'd you bring with you today?
Tonight, to my immediate right is the Substance Abuse Prevention Coordinator for the town of Stoughton that helps steer OASIS, our Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition, Ms. Stephanie Patton. Also in the gallery is one of our steering committee members, Mr. Todd Brown. And this is coming from the police department, but jointly with OASIS. So.
Okay. Did you want to speak to this, Ms. Wright, at all, or speak on the article, or pretty self-explanatory?
Yeah, it is pretty self-explanatory. It's just tightening up some of the holes that were left by the Question 2 article that was passed in 2008, I believe. Some of the holes and some of the issues that we have is that, you know, when police officers try to take action on public consumption of marijuana, we're not allowed to ask for identification. We also have no arrest power. We're just trying to tighten up the town bylaws on that so that we can get those things in place. It just gives us another tool for the town.
Okay. Any questions? John Rock.
First, I don't partake, so. and if I have, I haven't
not in public
inhaled.
anyway.
But under state law currently, is it a misdemeanor or is there discretion?
It's a civil citation, sir.
Okay.
The issues with the law passed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts did not meet their burden on this law. All right. The Commonwealth was supposed to put in educational programs for anyone who's caught under the age of 18. They have not yet done that. The way the law was written, it gave police officers the ability to give a civil citation as with, you know, almost like with a motor vehicle citation. The difference is, if you're in a car, I can demand your license. If you don't give it to me, I can arrest you. With this, I can't. So
Okay.
that's basically the main thing we're looking to change.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't want to see criminalize, you know, beyond like a civil.
Yeah, no,
I mean, just for simple usage, or you know.
No, well, but that's the issue, sir. It didn't deal with public consumption. All right, we're not talking about possession here. We're talking about public consumption.
Yeah.
So.
Bruce, and then Jim.
The fine structure over at the I'll just speak bluntly. Over the Cap playground, a friend of mine lives across the street, and you can smell it across the street because the kids are always over there. And I know you do drive-bys and they disperse and they just kind of hide under a bush. Fine of $300 when you find a kid with it under 18. Are they responsible for the $300, or is their parent responsible for the $300?
Well, that's kind of one of the holes we're looking to close, because according to the Commonwealth, if they don't pay it, there's no penalty for that. So that's what we're trying to come up with on this. Also, in order to answer that question, we've tried to do a lot to try and mitigate some of the problems you're talking about. We've taken down a lot of the brush. We've worked with DPW. We've tried to make it more clearer sight lines for the police as we go through there. It's certainly an issue that we've tried to deal with. The fact remains that if it's just straight possession, the voters did vote to decriminalize it, and it's a $100 citation by the statute for the Commonwealth for straight possession. If we see it as public consumption, that's what we're trying to get on this. As far as who's responsible for it, it'll be the person we write the citation to. But you know as well as I do that, if a kid has it and there's some type of penalty involved, the parents are probably going to get involved.
So, okay.
Barbara?
Okay, so I have a question because
I'm sorry,
I don't
Miss Jim.
understand,
Sorry.
police stuff all the time. So I'm driving down 138, and I'm in Canton, and I hit the Stoughton line. How is this different from what's going on in Canton?
Well, it's not in that particular scenario because you would be driving under the influence of drugs, and that's arrestable anyway.
Okay.
If
Okay, thank you.
if you're walking,
I'm just trying to
Careful,
see
you're talking
where
to a
your
chemist.
difference is so that I can understand what you're asking
the
for.
town of Canton, I believe, also has a public consumption bylaw. I can't tell you what the exact things are or what their penalties are. I can tell you that this is to prevent consumption in public places in our town. And
As opposed to like a state law, which would
Yeah,
cover like everybody in the state.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
I-
the
the
town,
only-
town bylaws can be more restrictive. They can't be more permissive.
Right, I'm not against it, don't get me wrong, but I'm just thinking that, if every town in the Commonwealth is allowed to make laws like this, how is a citizen supposed to know what you're supposed to be able to do and what you can't do in town? I thought that's why we should do statewide.
Well,
That's all I'm
city,
saying.
city and town, well, that's the issue, ma'am, is city and town ordinances and bylaws are designed just for that, so that towns can decide what they feel is best for them. As far as this case goes, this was something that was left unaddressed by the Commonwealth.
Okay.
And that's why we asked for the original bylaw to go in, which the original bylaw is already in there. We've actually only changed 2 pieces of language, which says that they have to identify themselves, okay? And that, if they refuse to do that, then technically, according to Mass General Law, we can make an arrest based on a violation of town bylaw.
So my other question, which will probably be more of a comment, is we probably should do more changing of state laws, right?
Well, I can't control the
Well,
Commonwealth, but...
no, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, but like I said, the enforcement for violation for public consumption, it already exists on our town bylaw. We're just trying to add the caveat that when we ask someone for their identification, they have to give it to us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jim?
And Mr. Kelly was just bringing up that there are actually different bylaws for alcohol in each town, too. And that gets actually into the next article that we'll be talking about, so.
Okay, thank you. I
Yep.
just, was curious.
Sure, yep.
I've had employment in Holland, very liberal country. They have a very similar law on their books. The way they got around this is they opened up these little places called coffee shops. If you want a cup of coffee, you go to a cafe. You want a hit of cannabis, you go to a coffee shop. You can get a high stick in your head in the door in these places. We could end up, if it turns out the same way, we could end up with a coffee shop on every corner in this town. So I think that there's some tightening up to do with this law right here now. Thank you.
Okay, Pat?
I think, Deputy Chief, you answered my question. The reason we don't have the before and after, it's just those 2 underlined sections that say, give us the ID and that we can arrest. That's
Yes.
all. So the rest of the bylaw exists now.
The rest of the bylaw
You're just adding
exists.
those 2 sentences.
Yes, from whoever to said official is what we would like to add, and by criminal indictment or complaint on a Mass General Law, it's Chapter 40, Section 21.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you.
Mr. Soares?
Joe Soares, Precinct 2. There are times I can't hear Lieutenant Devine.
Sorry, sir.
No, Just keep it at about 40 decibels?
Deputy Chief Devine.
I got
Deputy
you.
Chief Devine, excuse me.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So as long as we've already referenced Article 41, let's move on. Page 24, amend Chapter 209, alcoholic beverages. Is the underlying language here, Deputy Chief, the change?
Yes, it's, as with the prior, a good amount of these already exist on the books. We're looking to overhaul some of them. We're looking to change and tighten some of the things up. You know, obviously, we've had a few issues with licensed establishments over the last calendar year, so we've spent a lot of time looking at the town bylaws and tried to find some holes that need to be closed. So Stephanie did a tremendous amount of work researching towns like Foxborough and the city of Boston and other towns that have a large amount of licensed establishments. And what we've done is taken what we felt were the best parts of those and recommended those changes for our town as well.
Okay. Is there any questions? All right. Mr. Suarez.
Joe Soares, Precinct 2. I'm sorry, I don't understand. What is it? Number E, is that what we're trying to
That's the new
input?
language.
That's one of them, sir. There's actually many, but if you're looking at that one particular part of 290-1, yes, we'd be adding E to that. We'd also be adding the word may to where it says liquor violation penalties may be as follows. In the prior bylaw, it said shall, so it kind of tied the licensing board's hands on the penalties that they could dole out. So we're looking to change it so that they have the option to give different penalties.
And this is just for the stores that are selling them, is that it?
No, it keeps going, sir. It actually updates not only the package store licenses, but restaurant licenses and club licenses as well. A lot of these changes are similar over the 3 different types of licenses.
Okay, and how will these hurt the people who sell the liquor?
Well, I don't know that it'll hurt them at all, sir, as much as it'll hold them accountable. What a lot of folks may not realize is since Chief Shastany's been here, one of the things that we instituted is anytime that we have an arrest at a licensed establishment, anytime we place someone into protective custody, if we have a fight, if we have anything that we believe is alcohol related, in addition to the police response, the supervisor is then responsible for going back and doing a license investigation to see that if that person was overserved or if there were any other violations of town bylaw or ABCC regulations. If there are, then that report gets typed up and it gets submitted to the licensing board. So some of these things we're actually doing already, but we're just looking to try and tighten the language up so that our licensed establishments are just more responsible. I can't think of anything in here that would necessarily incur cost to any of them. It's just that it would make them be more responsible in their practices.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Okay, just procedural. You ran this by the lawyer, all the changes, our town council? You just wrote it? Or who'd you run it by to make sure that it was actually legal?
Well, it's legal because we've taken it from other towns. Okay, they're existing.
Not our lawyer.
No, we didn't create anything. We didn't invent anything. They're existing bylaws from other towns.
Okay.
So.
And does it have to go to that place in Boston that gives the licenses?
No, that you're thinking about the ABCC. Yeah, the local licensing board is actually the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, so this does not have to be approved by them if they
No.
do something and take away a license, that board in Boston will support them because we have this language.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Bruce, Pat, then Peter Ventresco, then Peter Murphy. Bruce.
In just kind of perusing this, under 209-43 entertainment,
Yes, sir.
there shall be no indecent or immoral entertainment on the licensed premises.
Mhm.
What is the definition of immoral?
Well, hang on. What? Give me the number again, sir. I'm sorry.
209-43. And please don't say sir.
Which one are we looking at? All right. That's actually specifically defined within the existing bylaw. The only reason that change is in there, and I don't have the existing bylaw in front of me, I apologize for that, but the only reason that change is in there is because it didn't exist in this particular part. There were things that existed in, say, a club license that didn't exist in a restaurant license, and all we're trying to do is marry those two up so that they're the same.
Yeah, 209-18 has the existing
Right.
language.
So.
No, 209-18.
Dash 18, that's
Yeah,
the
there's
that's-
already language in it. We're
Yeah, it
not
just
creating a new
says-
definition.
But it doesn't define immoral.
It actually does, sir, in the actual bylaw.
Okay. The only reason I kind of saw that, and I don't want to get to that, what's that movie, Footloose? Like, somebody starts defining immoral, and then somebody else gets it.
No, it's specifically defined in the existing bylaw, and, you know, it's defined as indecent exposure, it's defined as...
If it's defined somewhere,
Yeah, it is. We're not looking to change that, we're just looking to add it to the other licenses, that's all. So.
Pat?
It's pretty scary. Bruce and I are sharing a brain. That was my same exact question, so.
Okay.
Wanted to know what immoral was.
All right.
So I could go elsewhere.
Peter
Forget it.
Ventresco?
Yeah, I got a couple of things here. Right at the beginning of the violation penalties on D.
Yep.
Fourth offense, total revocation of license.
Yes, sir.
I don't know, I think that's kind of severe. I mean, you put somebody right out of business.
Well, that's why we're trying to change the word to may, because that's existing, sir. That's the existing
Gotta change that
language
to may.
as it is right now. As it is right now, the Board of Selectmen, according to our bylaw, if there's a fourth offense, they have to revoke. We're actually looking to change that from shall to may so that we give them that option.
All right, because sometimes, I mean, you got hired people there, they always...
Sure.
In any organization, people run astray. Okay, and I guess that's it.
Peter Murphy?
This is way too scary because I was looking at 209-43-2 as well. And the reason why it kind of jumped out at me, you have Alex's down the street. And there's been a gentleman there with a cross, and he has his right to do that, but he considers that place immoral. So, and I'm not sure how that's defined, and I don't know how to address that.
Well, again, sir, like I said, it's already defined in the existing bylaw. We're not looking to try and change that. All we're looking to do is make it consistent with throughout the other three licenses.
And then moving on to the next line, dash 44, after hours. And it says alcoholic beverages after legal hour of sale for the same. Now, I know there's a lot of bars, they cut off alcohol at 12:30. And you've got like a half hour to drink the alcohol. The sale's been cut off at 12:30. Does that mean they have to take that beverage away right at 12:30?
No, sir. It's specifically defined dependent upon what the time for the license is. So if you had a 12:30 license, you have 20 minutes after that everything has to be off the bar. So if it's 12:30 for sale, then everything has to be off the bar by 12:50.
Okay, so that's in the actual...
Yeah, that's
Okay.
in the actual bylaw.
Thank you.
Mr. Cohen? And then we'll be moving on.
If everyone forgot, we had an incident in this town. I won't mention the place, but we had to call the riot squad out to take care of it. People going after policeman's gun, a guy was shot, sent to Boston, we found him. Just remember, the law's got to get tightened up so they protect our own police officers. And that's what I think the deputy chief is doing, because I read in the paper that they were trying to sue the town because of what we did. They never mentioned what went on in there, and what I got out of this of the newspaper Guy was shot, taken out the back door, brought to the hospital. We found him. But just the general conditions that went over there, I had a friend that was riding down the street that was not involved but saw it, and it was the most disgraceful. This town doesn't deserve things like that to happen, and I'm glad the police department and the people that are helping them are shoring these laws up, holding the people accountable for their action. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cynthia Welch, Ms. Welch. I saw her hand, but
That's okay.
it looked like
It's
an
just
Oasis
that,
person.
there's been two committees that rewrote this. I was the chair of the second one. I was a member of the first one. And Article 1, I actually wrote that in 1980. And it came back to bite us on the posterior because you could have a gunfight and offer prizes and come in and say, well, this is my first offense. So that's why that part of it is extremely important, that if you come in and your first offense is egregious, someone's killed on the premises and you sold tickets, we can say, well, you know, we're going right to revocation, thank you very much. And everything else is either to be more specific or to make sure that all of the licenses conform to the same rules.
Thank you, Ms. Welch. Okay, moving on. I believe that ends this portion of the municipal operations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Yep, Peter? Well, actually, we're just going to continue on and just bring in the intergovernmental, so. Yeah, you can certainly adjourn. Yep. So municipal operations is going to adjourn. Intergovernmental relations and municipal regulations. Yep.
Is there anyone else, due to my own ignorance, is there anyone else from intergovernmental that's here that I don't recognize?
Say again, please.
Is there anyone from intergovernmental that I haven't spoken with that I don't recognize due to my own ignorance? We do not have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And municipal regulations is also here and does have a quorum. All right, moving on to Article 4. Let me see, Article 34, page 16. This is to fund the Abandoned Housing Initiative. I was going to do those for them. Poetic justice.
I've asked the selectman to come up because it was his idea.
Our Board of Select people are always welcome.
Essentially, this is
Select
a program that has been around for a while. It's sponsored by the Attorney General's office. And it involves appropriating a certain amount of town money and using a process to come in and put abandoned buildings into receivership. And from that, it gets legal, and I'm turning it over to Bob.
So I had thought maybe to illustrate the point to bring some photographs of properties that would be the possible subject of this, and realized quickly that that would be unfair to the property owners, so I didn't want to do that. But I'll illustrate without getting too specific. There is a parcel that is in the process of tax taking, that is abandoned, that is derelict. There are more than one of those properties in town, but this particular property has prompted neighbors to contact the Board of Selectmen and the town manager to do something about it. It is a residence. Now, by the time the process, and if and when the tax taking is completed, then the town can do something, but then there's still a one-year period of redemption after tax taking. So there's huge problems, and we're looking at a period of, if you're lucky, 4 years, more likely 6, for abandoned residential properties to receive any attention by the town to remedy. It's not fair to the neighbors, not fair to the community, And when you drive around the community, and when you talk to other residents of the community, I'm sure you hear, as I do, let's do something because we need to clean up this town. I'm sure every one of you could think of more than one property that is abandoned, that is derelict, and that you hear or ask, why isn't the town doing something about it? And the answer is, we can't yet. Well, the Attorney General's office has formed the Abandoned Housing Initiative as a mechanism to correct this problem, so we would not have to wait for the tax-taking process to complete. We would be able to announce to the property owner the conclusion that it's abandoned and derelict, give the property owner a period of time to remedy the situation. When that wasn't done, go in and put the property under receivership, bring the property back up in receivership, lien the property for the cost of doing that, and then we would get a restored, habitable residential property back on. Good for the neighbors, good for the property, good for the town, and we get our tax and we get our investment back. That's what this is intended to do. And if we want to try this on one or two properties, and a goal would be to create a revolving fund, if that's the right word, so that we would, once we fund it, use the revolving fund and identify properties and bring it back. There's another important, there are two other important factors to consider, and that's public safety of the nuisances that are out there. These are attractive nuisances for people, kids, to go into, play in. They're attractive nuisances for vagrants to go in and reside in. They're dangerous places potentially for public service personnel to have to deal with. We have a responsibility to do a better job, and this is a tool we can use for that.
What's the $100,000 to be used for, Mr. O'Regan?
What we would like to do is fund an account that would provide the seed money for the rehabilitation of the property. That would then, so suppose there was a property that needed $50,000 to bring it back up to habitable condition. That $50,000 would come from this property, from this fund. That $50,000 would be liened against the property and then recovered against the lien. And then if we establish the revolving fund, as the properties were worked through, it would be self-sustaining.
If the property really wasn't recoverable, it wouldn't make sense, for example, to put money back into it. Would the town just demolish it at that point with this funds, or?
Well, the Abandoned Housing Initiative is an initiative to bring back neglected, abandoned housing stock. If it's that far gone, then the condemnation proceeding would be the way that we would go.
Okay.
Okay, so this isn't a way to throw money down the sewer hole. It's a way to bring back something that's habitable and protect the neighbors and the public safety and the public interest.
Mr. Delinsky, did you? Yeah, but are you all set, Jim, too? I'm just trying to get the list together.
Right.
I know Bruce, but you were just pointing. Did you also want to be recognized later on? Okay, thanks. And then we have folks from the audience, too. Okay.
Can I?
Oh, smokes. Well, I'm sorry. Wait a minute.
Am I up, Rick?
You are. Go ahead.
Thank you. When you say abandoned housing, is Article 35 going to define what is considered?
No, it is defined by regulations of the Attorney General. It is a statewide definition. It falls under the Attorney General's program. It is supported by the Attorney General's office. It isn't a definition that we come up with ourselves.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, would it make sense for one of you to move to discuss both the Articles 34 and 35 together?
Yeah, Article 35 is only remotely related. Selectman O'Regan is right. There is a defined definition for an abandoned house under the Attorney General's program. It's very specific. This one is a local bylaw that puts authority in the hands of the building official to take action on dilapidated properties as well as abandoned buildings. What we currently have is we have no enforcement ability because we don't have a bylaw that allows us to enforce it. So this actually requires, 35 requires, when a house is abandoned, for it to be registered. There's a fee for registration, so it would be up to the mortgage holder to register it. It requires the mortgage holder to be responsible for upkeep. And it gives the building official the authority to fine someone who fails to follow through on the upkeep.
So, do we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it applies to more than just housing. The AHI applies only to housing that's rehabilitatable.
Correct. So, and again, I'll just play stupid because I do that very well. 35, what you were just talking about, the enforcement of some regulations that the mortgagee would be responsible for
We're the owner in a building that's occupied.
versus Article 34, which falls under this other category where the town, is it almost like an eminent domain type of thing? That, where that line is drawn is where I'm getting
Are we
confused.
discussing both of these together now? Is that what's happening?
No, I'm not intending to go there.
I know they are. I just want to.
I'm not intending to go there. I'm just like this.
We've got a dividing line here. Okay.
34.
34 is a defined program that you actually have to participate jointly with the Attorney General's office. They place the house into receivership. We do not. So it has to meet their requirements.
So it's under receivership of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Attorney General.
That is my understanding, correct.
And
what
under that program, then we have local rights to, as Selectman O'Regan was saying, to
Under that program, we have the
rehabilitate
right
it
to rehabilitate and lien the property.
and lien the but in terms of all the, are we looking to take ownership of it and then sell it?
No.
Then how are you making it inhabitable?
What we're looking to do is to relieve places of blight in the community, particularly in neighborhoods, most likely where absentee landlords have decided to not pay attention to their property anymore, or folks, for whatever reason, have left it and not taken care of it. It's a fire risk, it's a public safety risk, all of those risks. So what this allows the town to do, instead of waiting 5 or 6 years for it to fall into tax title, to intervene, bring it up, make it habitable. After the receivership, then there would be the process of recovering the lien. Yes, in order to recover the lien, could you force a sale? Yes, but the initial purpose is to rehab the property, to relieve, I'll call it blight, although the regulations don't call it, make it habitable, and serve the community that way.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second then. In this program, if I let my house go to poo, this program, you would come in and then make it nice again, and then I could move back.
I don't think so. It has to be abandoned. It's not that you move, it has to be abandoned. There's a definition of abandoned, and it doesn't mean that you just don't live there anymore. It's not livable, it's not habitable,
And so the Attorney General would then have a definition of abandoned.
Correct.
And the town of Stoughton under 35 would have another definition of, and the two definitions may not coincide.
That's correct. The intent behind the Attorney General's program is to take those houses that are rehabilitatable and rehabilitate them before they turn to trash in the 5 to 6 years it takes us to take them by tax title. And that's the sole purpose of the program, is to intervene when there's still a structure that can be saved and potentially flipped for somebody to live in.
I'm just having a hard time figuring out where we win.
we win because we don't have blighted derelict houses spotting the community, becoming rat traps for vagrants and fire traps for public safety personnel, and nuisances to everybody who lives in the neighborhood with them. We help make the town a better place to live.
And the lien allows us to reacquire our costs.
Now, the experience, the experience that the Attorney General's office has with this is that the property owner typically will understand that if the community goes in to rehabilitate the property, the cost of having the community do that through the receivership are probably significantly higher than if they just called somebody and fixed it themselves. And so the Attorney General's office report states that most often upon the property owner's receipt of notice of intent to put it into receivership, the property owner will take action and restore the property to habitable condition.
So if that doesn't all come to fruition, and it does get to that tax-taking point where the town can put it up for auction, at that point, when we put it up for auction, I don't know what the cost, like, what do we get?
Tax taking is different and much later from...
Correct. No, but I understand what you're getting to a point now where you're saying this program, we set up this revolving fund, and that's what the $100,000 is, to seed this revolving fund, from what I understand. So we seed this with that money, and then this program takes in effect, but now you have a rehab property at the tax that still
Question, how do we
somebody's
get our
not
money
there.
back?
Yeah,
I would
How do we get our money back?
I would imagine that, you know, I believe that there's a period, and I wish I could recall off the top of my head, that the lien has to be satisfied before you foreclose on the lien, and that is a shorter period of time than tax taking, and it's not a tax taking. So all of those...
You're foreclosing on the lien to whom?
To the property owner.
The mortgage, so the mortgage holder.
The property owner.
So if the property owner abandoned it, based on the fact that this is under the abandoned housing, so they abandoned it, they're not coming back, they're gone. Who's paying for it? It's abandoned. The property owner is gone.
You sell the property and you satisfy the lien after it's sold. From the buyer.
So that's my point. So at the end of this process, we have a rehab property that the town basically did all the work on. Somebody comes in and buys it, as opposed to buying, like, there was a property across the street from the temple that I know was used.
Can the house be sold before we've gotten our money back?
But not without getting our money back,
Okay.
because there's a lien of record.
We have to get paid first.
The important thing is that this places the property in receivership. And this isn't the time, and certainly at 10 o'clock it's not a, and you don't want.
Well, could we get a copy of the Attorney General's program, please?
Yes, you should.
That would be
I
helpful.
should have sent you one. I believe, I thought we did.
Okay.
Again, Bruce, this is just a quicker process than
I've got 8
tax
more
title.
people in line before you two, so hang on.
Well, the win would be is once we set up the revolving account, which would have to come in a subsequent town meeting, then the proceeds to pay off the lien would go into that revolving account and be used to rehab future buildings. Correct. And then the part that goes towards the lien, once town meeting sets up the revolving fund, will go into that revolving fund, and we would appropriate from that revolving fund for future renovations.
Okay.
All right. Okay, moving on. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was heading down the same track as Bruce. I do have
We can
one
move
little
on?
part. If Bruce was to stay in his house and let his property become derelict, it's still a blight on that neighborhood. We can't do anything
Not
about it.
abandoned. It must be an abandoned property for this to apply.
So we're not talking about blighted properties.
We are in the next article, Jim, in Article 35.
Pat?
I was just asking you about that initiative, but I found the manual. I sent it to to you, Rick, so we can get a copy to everybody who needs it, so.
Great, thank you. Barbara?
Establishing the fund, you said next year, I'm happy.
We didn't want to go through setting up and doing without a test. I believe that we can identify properties readily that we would use initially, and then by this time next year, we hopefully would have success to tell you about, and setting up the revolving fund would be something we'd all think would be a good thing to do.
Okay, so now I've got Joe, Mr. Morgan, I think Ms. Schneider, if I'm correct, and Bob Cohen. And then I've got Joe and Roberta and Ed. So right now I have Joe.
I could actually...
Who's invisible? I've just named everybody in the room. I said Stephanie, didn't I? Yes, I said Mr. Morgan, Janice Schneider, Stephanie, and Bob C. Okay, well, you're in there. You're on the list.
When you take a house in tax taking, and then you put it on the market, that does not relieve any other liens against the property.
Our lien takes precedence under state law. When we take a property under tax title, it is awarded to us by land court, and we get the full
Only
proceeds.
if it's land court held land, if it's quitclaim.
No, every tax taking is awarded by land court, by statute. Otherwise, it's not a tax taking.
But when this town takes any property in tax taking, it's only satisfying the taxes.
No, sir. The full 100% of the revenue minus the legal cost of the land court, it's a $1,500 filing fee, minus the attorney fees for handling the case, and minus the commission for the auctioneer. The rest of it goes to us. By Massachusetts state law, it's not like a repossessed car. We get everything entirely in the proceeds from a tax sale.
Okay, I got a second question.
And that's why your mortgage banks are so eager to make sure your real estate tax.
I understand that. I sell real estate. But anyways, my second question is, who's going to determine what work is going to be put into it, and how will you put it out to bid?
You know, I don't know that that's within the scope of this.
All right.
So let's move on, please. I have Mr. Morgan. Is it Morgan? Is it Mr. Morgan? Mr. Fallon, I'm sorry. Mr. Fallon.
So I just wanted to bring up to explain before, because I can't really, the example that I want to say will show an address, and I don't want to say it over the air right now.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm not sure that we want to talk about specific properties. We want to talk about the law and whether we want to adopt this.
I just wanted to know, what if the people pay for the land and they left the house to rot, but it's still there? Put it that way.
Well, it's considered abandoned, and it's a definition of what abandoned is within the Attorney General's program, I gather.
Okay.
So if they abandon the house, I guess the assumption is they abandoned the land.
As far as I know, nobody lives there, but...
If they're out back working the land, then I would say that the house is not abandoned. It might be camping out, but...
No, this house is abandoned. It's halfway down, but it's still there. That's what I mean. It just looks terrible in between two companies.
So at the risk of stepping on the toes of the town manager, last town meeting approved an improved budget so that we now have a code enforcement officer. So whether something is habitable and meets zoning and building code and other things, that might be what that gentleman's question refers to, as opposed to abandoned housing that would be rehabilitated under this bylaw.
Could we let them pay for the, if they're still paying for the land, can we let them?
Under Article 35, if the building official determines that the house is not habitable, if this bylaw passes, that would be Article 35, not 34. He
Thank
has,
you.
he has the ability to order it to be torn down and the land is liened to cover the cost of the town's demolition.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schneider? And am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you.
My question has to do
I'm
with...
sorry, just, you got a name and address?
Oh, Janice Schneider, Precinct 6. My question has to do with Article 35. Is this appropriate now?
No.
Okay.
Mrs. Carrara?
Nope.
$34.
Stephanie Carrara, Precinct 2, Municipal Regs. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. O'Regan, you mentioned that the owner would have to register the property, so would that, someone would have to register? I was writing really quick, so.
That's Article 35 stuff.
Oh,
Mr. Cohen, anything for Article 34? Okay, wait a minute, Roberta. And then Ed, and that's it.
So this is sort of a government taking over personal responsibility, feel-good program. That's the way I see it. It's something we probably shouldn't get into. Now let me say why. If we get into this program, I don't understand the difference between rehabbing and how this has a connection with increasing 40B, perhaps inventory, which it could do. And the other thing is, if you want to take something by eminent domain, it simply has to be declared blighted, decadent, abandoned, etc. And that process goes on it doesn't have to go on forever and ever and ever. That's not a 4 or 5 year process. That doesn't involve tax taking and everything else. And then you said, in the beginning, you said that if the property owner thinks that the property is going to go into receivership, then the property owner will probably take some action. If the property owner is destitute, how would you expect the property owner to ever take any action? They can't take action. Their hands are tied. Supposing I am in the Army, I am in the Navy, I am in another country. Grandma or great-grandma passes away. The property is here in Stoughton. I don't have the means for someone to take care of it. So it becomes, it's by your definition here, the property is abandoned.
Well, the taxes are still being paid, right?
I don't know. Maybe I'm in the outreaches of Afghanistan or wherever I may be at that point.
For 6 years?
All I'm trying to say is there are other means of dealing with blighted, abandoned buildings other than getting into something like this where the town puts its money forward.
Well,
there are other quicker ways of dealing with it.
A few of the points that were made, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
don't connect to this proposal. This has nothing to do with 40Bs. This has nothing to do with eminent domain. If action were taken against this property for eminent domain, the town would have to pay, even though it might not be a lot, full market value for the property, which I submit is likely to be much more than the cost to bring it back up to habitable condition. As far as whether or not it's abandoned, the hardship that may have led to the abandonment does not change the fact that you have an abandoned dwelling that is a blight on the community, a hazard to public safety personnel, and an attractive nuisance to people in the neighborhood and to vagrants. And the reason I brought this forward is all of those trigger a responsibility of the community, because those are interests of the community that we need to protect. If you have a soldier who is serving in Afghanistan who can't take care of the property, and this allows us to take care of the property for him until he gets back and the lien gets paid, then maybe it's a way we can honor his service by doing that. But to do nothing and continue to complain that there are aspects of what this community looks like, what our neighborhoods, aspects that may be decaying, when this is a tool to reverse that, I think is missing a great opportunity for us to take advantage. It is not an aspect of doing something for somebody as a do-gooder thing. It's protecting the public interest in the housing stock and the safety and the neighborhoods.
That's Roberta's question. He's not talking about that. Say again.
Before you take the house, you only cannot move back in.
That's right.
Now, to the service overseas, when they fix it, he can come back and move in.
No, he can't.
You just said that.
The question is in the example of if the person is overseas in the Army and hasn't had any communication or contact with the property, hasn't paid taxes, has abandoned the property for 6 years because he's in Afghanistan for such an extended period of time, and we go ahead and go through this process and rehab the property, can that person come back and take that house? Is that what you just said?
The property is in receivership at that point. If the soldier wants to redeem it from receivership, all the town cares about is getting the money back from rehabbing the property. That's all the lien would secure for the town, because the town has already achieved its goal of making the property habitable and removing the blight. So the answer is yes. And furthermore, the soldier would have received notice before as the receivership was being contemplated. So if there's a concern that this would all go on without the soldier off in Afghanistan finding out about it, the answer is no. And there is something called the Soldiers and Sailors Relief Act that is intended to protect soldiers serving in harm's way from having their property rights adversely affected by civil proceedings going on back home.
I can't imagine our veterans agent
Soldiers
wouldn't
and
find
sailors, I'm
a
sorry.
benefit program for this as well. Okay. Ed.
Yeah, on this, it goes into receivership. Let's just say it's $50,000 to fix it up. You decide to foreclose, and you sell it for $100,000. Where's the other 50 go?
Well, if there are liens against the property, they go to satisfy the liens. If there are no liens against the property, the receiver would have to turn it over to the property owner. The receiver is a fiduciary. Think of a receiver as something like a trustee.
No, if it goes to the owner of record, whatever.
Goes
at
to the
end of
owner
day.
of, yeah.
It doesn't go to the town, it doesn't
No.
go into this fund or whatever.
Correct.
That sort of thing. Right.
Now, if there were-
Okay, this fund, if we fund the $100,000, can we get it back to the town, or is this gone, we can't touch it kind of
No,
thing?
the idea of the lien is to make sure that when the work is done, the town gets the money back. So there'd be a lien on the property. When the property owner gets the bill, hopefully the property owner will pay. And if the property owner doesn't pay, the town can then enforce its lien, sell the property, and get the money back. We are not looking at having this money disappear. We're looking at it as a way to remedy a problem that I hear about all the time, and I think most of you hear about all the time, and it's time that we did something to fix it. This is a tool to do that.
Mr. Cohen? Are you moving the question? Article 35. Is there any debate left on that one? Ms. Schneider?
Janice Schneider, Precinct 6, and Intergovernmental Relations. On page 21, there's two sections that don't seem to have any language next to them. Did I miss something?
Which page?
I'm on page 21, section 173.13 and 173.14. What's missing?
Oh, they don't belong there.
Oh,
They should have been deleted.
Are we talking about sections 173-13 and 173-14?
yes, sir.
Correct.
Okay. So they don't need to be here?
No.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Carrara?
I don't care care about receivership. I just want my questions answered. Stephanie Carr, Precinct 2, Municipal Regs. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. O'Regan, you mentioned that the owners had to register the property. Did I hear that right? Because I was writing quick. No, because I didn't say that. Okay, did.
I said that.
Sorry.
Under this bylaw, the owner has to register the property.
Okay. And would they register with the town or state?
They would register with the town, specifically with the building official.
So they would maintain the records?
Correct.
Okay. And do we know the dollar amount fee that they would have to pay to register? If it's in there, I'll find it.
I believe it's,
That's okay, thanks. I'm good with that. And my last question is...
yeah, it's, a minimum fee is $150.
Okay. My last question is, if there's a property in town that's designated for housing, but yet the zone is either commercial or industrial, does this abandoned housing apply to that property?
It applies to existing property, whether it's commercial or industrial or residential, and it applies to both abandoned properties and dilapidated properties.
Thank you.
Okay, David?
I'm in favor of this bylaw. In my former life, we inspected numerous buildings in this town, myself, the police, a contractor, the building official at the time, and through no avail, buildings that we wanted torn down were not torn down because we didn't have this to back us up. All we had was the word of the building official. The one that comes to mind all the time when I get on Route 27 is still standing. 4 times we asked that building to be torn down and nothing has happened. I'm still living there. Not you. Never 27, the other way. The other way, Mrs. Walsh. So, I am in total favor of this bylaw. Good job, whoever wrote it.
Roberta?
One question, and that is, what about if it's a town-owned building?
Well, it's not abandoned.
But it could be dilapidated.
It could be. It is.
We believe that if we're successful in getting you all and then town meeting to agree to a facilities manager, that over time we will address our own building needs. That would be the intent.
Thank you.
Peter?
All right, on the dilapidated, 2, buildings having defective weather protection such as paint, stain, siding, or tarpaulin. Now, we're going to go after somebody because the house isn't painted, or the shingles, cedar shingles are left to weather for 50 years, or a broken window. I can board it up with plywood, paint it black, and paint white curtains on like a house on the corner of Pine Street and Pleasant Street.
Cape and Reynolds?
So that would satisfy you people, I guess.
I think the intent here is that, my reading of it is that you're talking about buildings that are open to the weather for one reason or another.
And I don't know, then there's another place about fines here, going up to $9,000 maximum. I don't know exactly where that is now, but it's in here someplace. Oh, yeah. 59.7 enforcement violation penalties. Well, that's $300 a day, but it doesn't exceed $9,000. That's a lot of money. Then you want a security guard to guard a house that's unoccupied. That puts a bigger burden financially. So I'll go back to my first statement. Let the town go in there, board it up, paint it black windows and doors. And
Yeah, essentially, it says that if the property is not maintained, the Board of Selectmen can correct the deficiency and impose a fine as well as a lien upon the property.
and that would be the intent, is to secure the property and keep it from becoming an attractive nuisance until such time that we can get done with the legal process.
All right, one more. I don't know if the town's still in that program, but the state used to have a program where a person needed siding or roof or plumbing or do the whole house over. He applies for that grant, and as long as he stayed there for 5 years, he wouldn't have to pay a penny back. But if he moved out in the first or second year, he'd have to pay a portion back. That doesn't, is that program's not around anymore?
I frankly don't know, Peter, whether it's around or not, but if it were around, it would be one resource that the building official could direct the property owner to.
Well, I should think you'd pursue that avenue and see how that goes for a lot of these houses that the house is probably there, deteriorated, and somebody builds a new house next to it, but the house was there first, but now they're going to complain about that house there. And they shouldn't have moved into that neighborhood to start off with. That's all.
Jim, and then we're moving on.
Mr. Chairman, when does the clock start ticking on this, when a property becomes abandoned? There's a piece of property across the street from Chemung School that's been caving in for about 25 years, I guess. Do they immediately fall under the $1,500 for properties that have been abandoned or vacant for 3 years or more?
That one would, yes. If, but this, essentially, the bylaw says that once the building official has determined the property is abandoned, the owner, and it's up to the building official to research and determine who the owner is, the owner has 90 days to register the property and pay the fee.
So that property is not officially abandoned at this time?
I'm not certain whether or not we could apply this bylaw retroactively, and that's really what you're asking me, and I don't know. That would be a question for town council.
Thank you.
Scott.
I'll make it quick, Rick. I know you got Nancy. Yeah, sure. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the town manager. On section 173.3, it says vacant or abandoned building determination. The building inspector is going to be the only guy that's going to determine this stuff?
Well, it would also include it also says that the local inspector, which would also include the assistant.
Right.
I believe also that under the statute, state statute, the fire chief
That's what I was.
has
that's
the
what I was
ability to make
wondering
that
if
determination also.
Because when I worked in another town, and then he was actually the guy who dropped the hammer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to our next public hearing, which is the Finance Committee, Intergovernmental Municipal Regulations and Planning Board. I know that this position for intergovernmental, I don't know if that's changed.
26.
Municipal Regulations is still here.
Page 26.
Is anybody here from the Planning Board? I guess not. All right, I am looking at Article 26.
Page 10.
Prepare sewer priority plan, page 10.
Good evening. Mark Tisdale, Town Engineer.
Welcome, Mark.
Yeah.
Sit down. All right.
Just in terms of background, if you'll recall, there was an article last year for Park Street Sewer. The board requested that that article be withdrawn. The reasoning at the time was that we needed to take a look at a priority plan for sewering those portions of towns that we believe needed to be sewered. And that's what this article is intended to do. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thank you. I'll try to just summarize what we're trying to accomplish here. It is going to be a sewer priority plan, and it's going to build upon what was done in 1980 when we prepared a sewer needs survey of the town. Essentially, what this document did is it prioritized all the areas of town that needed sewer, mostly based on environmental factors like soil conditions, groundwater tables, location to sewer, water resource protection areas, things of that nature. What we're trying to do is add a few layers to that. One being an economic factor, weighing in that. Does the project have a possibility of bringing increased tax revenues to the town? Also, what this plan will do is it will assess the baseline hydraulic capacity of the system. So if there's any issues with the system, at least the main trunk lines will be aware of it. So if we had a major sewer project and we wanted to tie into an existing sewer line, we know that the project is the project without having to upgrade the downstream sewer lines, which is very important. Part of this plan will be to calculate the flows and loads from the areas that we establish in our priority list. So, for example, if Park Street sewer was one of the areas, it would calculate the flow from that area and the impacts downstream when we tie in. And also we will get cost estimates for each one, approximate cost estimates for each one of these areas that we're looking at. One last comment is that the public will be involved with this. There will be public forums and meetings to get the public's input on prioritizing these areas. So when a sewer article does come to town meeting, that the public had a chance to take a look at this.
How long will it take?
What was it? Excuse me?
How long will the study take?
I would say probably about 6 months.
In time enough for you to put together a plan for the following town meeting to address the town needs?
That's the plan.
Okay. Mr. Ventresco and then Mr. Carrara?
Like, when you're saying upgrade the truck lines, Central Street is a truck line that was put in the 60s. That's still okay?
Yeah, all we know is from talking to DPW if they had to maintain anything or if there's any overflows. Right now, we're fine. But what we're looking to do is analyze the system under the proposed loading rates, which will change things.
And on that master plan from 1988, does that include Canton Street?
This actually showed every area in town, because at that time, if it had a lot of sewer in it, it was a low priority, you know.
Yeah, but do you know where Canton Street is? Low priority, high priority?
I'd have to look in the document.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Mr.
But also,
okay, go
part
ahead.
here.
Go ahead. Part two.
I see in the state budget, they're appropriating money for sewer and water upgrades. So could be some cheap money coming to the cities and towns to do exactly what you want to do here.
Yeah, that would be great. Any potential grants or funding that we can use to help towards this would be ideal.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you point that out and find that for me? We'll take a look at it. Mr. Carrera.
Mark, when you go to get this, you said economics and stuff like that. That's my favorite thing because it just screams Park Street. But wouldn't we just look at neighborhoods, their ages, their lot sizes? Because there's a lot of places in town with tiny, tiny lots that cannot handle another septic system. You know that as well as I do. And I'm hoping that they're going to look at that, because it took them a long time to source some stuff that was really close to the center of town, and usually that's your hub, and you work your way out from there. But I'm going to say it again. Park Street is going to only service one individual. There's not enough stuff down there to build out on. It's all covered by wetlands on both sides. It's like a dead issue down there. There's more people who need help right now with their residential stuff than to run a trunk line that way for one place.
All right, but that's the whole town is the scope of this thing, right?
I think that's the point of why we're trying to do this. I mean, I certainly don't want to propose an article with my opinion. I want to get everybody's opinion, and we're going to weigh all those factors into it. Lot size is actually one of them. There's a lot of factors that are going to be involved with this. And then at the end of the day, we're going to get this 1 through 10 or 1 through 15 list, and everybody's going to have a say in it.
Because, Ricky, usually in this town it works. Those that scream the loudest get it, and then the ones that scream the loudest don't sign on. So if we're going to do extensions and major super extending of the lines, just like I asked at town meeting, I says, produce all the people who signed on. And you notice nothing was produced, and it was withdrawn, because the work wasn't done.
Are you saying that those people would influence the study and the priority that gets published in the study?
I'm just saying that it showed it the last time.
Well,
But
nobody
I'm
else-
saying that
nobody else was-
this is a good thing that we're gonna actually have it looked at properly.
But the last time, and I gotta take exception here, because those businesses came together and came to the town and said they'd put money up too. So this is what's prompting all this, is business owners coming to the town saying, we need some help. And I don't know anything about the engineering involved in this thing, but this is a town-wide study, and we're gonna find out, and that's what I think that we wanted, was for us to now have a new priority plan for the needs of the town.
Well, all that stuff was asked for, to see who ponied up, who was gonna ask for what, who put money up, where it was. None of that was ever laid out or produced, and nobody had
Okay, but it's got nothing to
anything.
do with this study. I just want to clarify, I don't want to talk about this one tract of business. This is for the whole town, okay? I don't want to get mired in one site. Mrs. Carrara.
My only comment on this article is, will there be provisions, because I think it's unfair for people to get, who want sewer, like it could be for one house, and then they get the necessary signatures, and it's people all over town, and that the town has to run those sewer lines down a street, and then it costs the town more money. That's just one thing I just wanted to bring to Mark's attention, which I'm sure he knows. But I just think it's unfair if one person wants it and a whole street doesn't want it, and people, they get their friends to sign the petition. That's not fair.
Yeah.
The town should have a provision to protect the people.
Yeah.
Well, the provision would be the appropriation from town meeting to fund it.
Well, and the Board of Selectmen, acting in their capacity as the Public Utilities Commission, have to adopt a hookup policy, which we don't currently have.
That's not fair.
As Mark pointed out, and as Scott pointed out, there are some areas of town where, when those systems suffer a Title V failure, those people can't do anything. Their lot size is too small to perk. And we know there are areas of town that need to be sewered environmentally, whether people want to hook up or not.
That's what Scott said. I got it.
That's what I just wanted to kind of touch on that. Because as a town meeting rep, I'm sick of people coming in, they say they're gonna sign on, the town runs the sewer down there, and then they're like, you know what, nothing's wrong with my system, I'm not gonna do that. And it's costing the town money. So hopefully there'll be a policy that won't allow that. Thank you.
I would have a hard time as a town meeting rep having one person come in and getting hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding for a project without the town meeting fully vetting that. Anyways, just a side comment. Peter?
I'm going to add a little bit to this. I'll take my street, for instance, Canton Street. It's a main artery, and it should have had a sewer 59 years ago. Okay, and because of that, a lot of people now putting in new systems, and they're above ground, so they got these pyramids in their backyard. Now, if they had the sewer in there before, maybe they wouldn't have put hooked up to the sewer when the sewer main was put in, but as soon as their system failed, rather than have a pyramid in their backyard, they would have hooked up to the sewer. But there's got to be some kind of a policy. If they run the sewer down these streets where some people put a new system in their backyard and spend, say, $20,000, $25,000, they shouldn't have to pay a betterment for the sewer going by their property because they just put a new system in because the town didn't have a sewer in the street. So them houses should be exempt until the time comes down, 20-some-odd years down the road, the system fails, then they hook up to the sewer, then they have to pay for the betterment. But
Okay.
anybody else that doesn't have that problem, they should hook up.
But this is for a sewer priority plan. Do we want
No, I'm
to
just
commission
adding a
that
little bit
study?
to what
I
was
know,
said
but
here.
this is for the study only. I know it's a lot of surround to how we enact the study, but this is the results of the study. This is just to fund the study. Do we want to do that or not? That's the question on the table. Are there any more questions related to funding the study? Moving on. Article 46, Central Business District alcohol licenses, page 44. Mr. Town Manager.
The intent here is to petition the state legislature to allow up to 6 new liquor licenses, all alcohol licenses, within the central business district, and hopefully result in better conditions for economic development. The town currently does not have any licenses available, and it's difficult to get a restaurant to come in and operate without a liquor license. So, for example, you know, the SRA has put the train station out for proposals on a restaurant. If, in fact, they are successful in awarding a proposal, that person is going to be looking for a liquor license, and the town currently does not have one. It's necessary to petition the legislature in order to get additional licenses. We simply cannot create them.
Okay. Peter.
What defines this district, business district, central business district? Just the downtown area itself?
It is actually a zoning district on a map.
Right.
All right. What happens if you gave out full license and a guy comes in and he wants to move in the area, but there's no area in this business district that he can set up his shop with an alcohol license? Is he, the way you got it, it's defined, he can't move out of the district, say?
The legislature,
100 yards?
the legislature defines or requires that it be defined in a specific area. And in the cases of some towns, it's actually required a specific street. They're very reluctant to give out additional licenses to anyone other than Boston that are not tied to a specific defined geographical area.
So that fifth guy, he's out of luck until somebody else, okay.
I think if we couldn't find a place in downtown, that's a good thing, if we got to that point. All right, moving on.
Thank you.
We now have the public hearing, which is with municipal regulations. That's just them. That's not us.
I think we're done.
And that's it. Is it possible that we're done? Wait a minute, hang on.
Wait a minute.
Relax. Yeah, well, Mr. Anzavino.
I was just wondering, Mr. Chairman, if you're going to
Regulations.
inform your board of the invitation. Our discussion earlier today about the invitation on the 29th, I just wanted to remind you, in case you had forgot at this hour,
Yeah,
to
I could see how you might think that.
mention it to your committee.
All right,
Thank you.
So, a couple of things. We know our next meeting is next Wednesday. We'll get an ad in the paper to make sure that the 31st has Article 20 included in it. There is, I'm sorry, we're still in session here.
What happened to 60 and 47, Mr. Chairman?
Municipal Regulations Committee only.
Yeah, I was going to plead low blood sugar, but Mr. Kelly made me eat. I'm sorry I interrupted you, sir.
We have the school committee and the Board of Selectmen have invited the Finance Committee as well, all 3 committees/boards to meet to discuss business of the town. And it would be an executive session meeting that is scheduled for Saturday, March 29th at 9 a.m. here in Town Hall. So I'm just putting that out there, that this committee is invited. I'm going to put it on our meeting calendar. I'm going to post an agenda with it to make sure that we're all in compliance, and we'll also invoke the correct executive meeting rule that we'll be observing to have that meeting, as an FYI to everybody. So I hope you can all make it. What other business? 31st is 9 a.m. this building?
No, no, no.
Oh, 31st is, says 7:30, it's normal time. And that's with the school committee, I believe. Is that right? Madam Chair of the Subcommittee for Schools?
Oh, what, tomorrow?
No, the 31st is schools. Okay,
Do we have Southeast Regional booked yet?
I don't think so. Okay, a week from today. Yep. Yeah, we have no meeting on Monday, which just coincidentally happens to be St. Patty's Day. Okay, take a motion to adjourn.
The schools are going to be at the 31st.
Wait a minute, who made the motion?
I didn't see him.
John. And, okay, you got to speak up. All those in favor? All those opposed? And I'm also including the municipal regulations in this vote. We're adjourning. Is everybody in favor?
Oh, it says okay.
Any objections? Any abstention? Okay. We are adjourned.
I just didn't know if there's anything. I was scribbling all over everything.
Berta.
Okay, I just scribbled dates. So